Welcome to Goofy Harry. Today's adventure: what if Hannibal Lecter adopted Harry Potter? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The guest at number 4. The first discourtesy Dr. Hannibal Lecter noted in Little Winging was the sound of a man shouting at a child in a public park. He had been standing, hands folded behind his back, at the edge of a well-tended rose bed, considering the local cultivar and finding it wanting. A Surrey summer had grown indolent across the afternoon. The air smelled of cut grass, of petrol on a distant road, of the particular resin a certain English rose exudes when it is not fed properly. It was a small and innocent scent, and he had been enjoying it. Then the man shouted. Hannibal did not move at first. He turned only his head, and then only by degrees. There was a practiced discipline to the motion that came from years of studying people without appearing to study them. In the past, he had stood at the back of operating theaters in 3 countries and watched surgeons make decisions about other men's bowels as if the decisions were chess moves. He turned his head the way a man turns his head in an opera when something interesting has happened in the orchestra and he does not wish to cause a stir. The man who was shouting was large in the way some Englishmen are large, with the appearance of having been inflated from the inside. He wore a short-sleeved shirt that had, at some point in its recent career, been white. Beside him waddled a smaller, squarer boy whose face bore the faint cruelty of the very comfortable. And several steps ahead of them, at the end of the man's voice like a small black dog at the end of a leash, walked a child. The child was 7, perhaps. He was thin in a way that had very little to do with being 7. His hair lay in a black scribble and his glasses were mended with tape. He carried a plastic shopping bag that had begun its life as one handle and was now attempting a second career as 2, tied together with wire. In this bag, so far as Hannibal could tell from 10 meters distance in a fluent eye, were a stack of used children's books he had not been given permission to read. "I told you to put them down, boy, I told you. What did I say?" The child said nothing. It was the silence that interested Hannibal first. Most children, shouted at so publicly, acquired in their faces either the squint of tears or the pinker flush of defiance. This child's face did neither. He walked in an efficient, conserved way. His spine was neat. He held the bag at the balance point and did not let it swing. "When we get home," the man said. Hannibal let his head return to a natural angle. He closed his eyes briefly, as one does when a single sour note has been struck in a long sonata. When he opened them, the rose bed was, as it had been, inadequate. A small brass plaque beside it read in memory OF. He did not bother to read the rest. He turned and walked at leisure in the direction the family had gone. He had been in England for 3 days on a private errand. A baritone in Verona had sent him a letter about a 19-year-old student with a voice of unusual breadth and an insecurity of unusual depth. Hannibal had some notion of writing a brief paper on the relationship between certain childhood hungers and the resonance of the mature voice. He had stopped in London for a bottle of vinegar he could not obtain in Baltimore, and in Guildford for a lunch at an old inn on the River Way, and in a village north of Surrey at an antiquarian bookseller for the second edition of a work on cooking with wild herbs. He had intended to be on the road to Dover by 4 and on the ferry by 7. He had not intended to visit Little Winging. He had stopped in Little Winging because he had been driving past a sign for it and had been taken with the name, which sounded like the complaint of a small dog. He had not intended to speak to anyone in Little Winging at all. The family walked for some distance along Magnolia Crescent and turned into Privet Drive, and Hannibal followed them at the easy distance of a man idly out for his afternoon constitutional. He had one of those faces, when he willed it, that people in English suburbs saw and did not quite see. Pleasant, unremarkable, the face of a visiting cousin. His clothes were good but not showy. He had been trained, long ago, and by no one he was willing to discuss, in the art of appearing ordinary at exactly the moment it was most important. Number 4 Privet Drive was a house of the kind the English put up in the 1950s and then pretended had always been there. It had neat curtains and a neat lawn and a neat car in the neat drive. The only thing in the entire ensemble that was not neat was the man who had gone inside it. Hannibal noted the brass 4 on the door, the curve of the iron latch on the gate, the attitude of the pebbles in the drive. He noted the small porthole window set into the wall just beside the front door, an unusual architectural detail not original to the house. It had been installed, he thought, to give someone a view of the staircase. The window was at a height that corresponded to something beneath the stairs. He walked on to the next corner and stopped under a pear tree and made a list in his mind. There was the fact of the shouting in the park. There was the fact of the child's silence. There was the fact that the child had not, even once, been invited to walk beside the man. There was the fact of the porthole window, which was of a height suggesting a cupboard. There was the fact, which he had noticed through the front window as they entered, that a small cupboard beneath the stairs had a padlock on it on the outside. All these facts, if one were in a hurry, could be explained away. Hannibal was not in a hurry. He stood beneath the pear tree a little while longer. The afternoon tipped down toward tea. Somewhere in the house on Privet Drive, a kettle went on with a click audible at the gate. At 20 minutes past 4, he rang the doorbell. It was opened by a woman who seemed to have arranged her face in advance of the door's opening, in case the person on the other side proved to be worth it. She was long-necked and dry-mouthed, her eyes moved in little arcs, pricing him. He watched her take in the cut of his coat and the shine of his shoes and the quiet gold of the pin in his tie and add it all up. He watched the sum arrive and her expression adjust. "Yes," she said. "Mrs. Dursley, I believe." Hannibal said, "Yes," a flush of pleasure at being recognized. "Dr. Lecter." He offered a card. The card said Dr. Hannibal Lecter, M.D., and beneath that, in discreet small type, "Consulting Psychiatrist." It did not say where. "Forgive the intrusion. A local school has flagged a routine welfare review in respect of Mr. Potter. I am here in the capacity of an outside consultant. I wonder if I might impose on half an hour of your time." Petunia Dursley held the card in her fingertips as if it might stain. She had not invited him in. She had also not closed the door. "Routine," Hannibal said. "In most cases, a cup of tea and a 5-minute conversation will close the file. I am told you keep an immaculate house." The flush moved from her cheeks to the hollow of her throat. "Of course," she said. "Come in." The hallway smelled of lemon polish and something faintly sweet that was not air freshener. The carpet was plush and pale. There were photographs on the wall, the squarer boy, young and younger and youngest, in a great many poses and no occasion. There was no photograph of the thin child. Hannibal did not look for one. He had not expected to find one. "My husband," Petunia said in a voice slightly raised, "is in the sitting room." "Perhaps I would be delighted," said Hannibal, meaning I would rather not. Vernon Dursley in his own sitting room was a larger and pinker proposition than Vernon Dursley in a park. He had his jacket off and his collar open. He had, on the coffee table, a glass into which something amber had been poured against medical advice. He looked up at the stranger in his doorway and almost, but not quite, stood up. "Who's this, then?" "Dr. Lecter," Petunia said in her social voice, the voice she had practiced for imaginary dinner parties. "A consultant from the school about the—" She lowered her voice and then, mortified at having lowered it, raised it again. "About the boy. That little Vernon." Hannibal had seated himself in the quiet interval in the armchair opposite the sofa. He had done it with the modest authority of someone who had been told to make himself comfortable. Now, with the small ceremony of a man opening a violin case, he set a slim leather folder on his knee and did not open it. "Mr. Dursley," he said, "I will not take more of your time than is necessary. If I find, as I expect I shall find, that the arrangements in this house are in good order, I shall say so in my report, and the matter will go no further." Vernon's jaw worked. "If, on the other hand," Hannibal said mildly, "I should find cause for concern, my report would have to reflect that, and I'm afraid a more formal review would be initiated, perhaps with social services. Perhaps with the local constabulary. I am told," he added, looking past Vernon at the photographs of the son on the mantelpiece, "that you have business connections in this district of some standing." Vernon understood. It's remarkable how quickly Vernon understood. He had the face of a man who had just had the leash tightened on a collar he had forgotten he was wearing. "Some tea," he grunted at Petunia. Petunia fled to the kitchen. Hannibal sat with his hands quiet on his knees and let the silence lengthen by exactly the amount most uncomfortable for a man like Vernon. Then, at the precise moment at which another breath of silence would have been intolerable, he said, "I wonder, do you cook, Mr. Dursley?" "What, at home yourself?" "Petunia does, of course. I ask only because I have an odd professional habit. I have found that a great deal about a household can be learned by the sharing of a meal. Not an interview over tea and biscuits, they give us all the same answers, but an honest dinner prepared together at the kitchen table." "You want, if I may," Hannibal said, "I would propose the following. Allow me to prepare dinner for you and your family this evening. I am told there is a small butcher on the Magnolia Road. I shall shop, I shall cook. You will have to do me only the service of eating it. In the course of that ordinary domestic evening, I shall learn what I need to learn, and you shall have your report tomorrow morning by 9:30. Those who do not mistreat children have nothing whatever to fear from my cooking." He watched, very quietly, the way Vernon's mouth moved over those last words. "Well," said Vernon. Yes, that's fair enough, that's very fair, Petunia." He surged to his feet and went through into the kitchen loudly to announce that their visitor had kindly offered to make them dinner. Hannibal stood and with his hands clasped behind his back considered for the first time the room as a room. The wedding photograph on the sideboard, the upholstered footstool worn on one side only, opposite the television. The small, strange absence where a child's drawings might have been pinned up and were not. The tidy skirting boards, the mantel clock that had been set a minute fast and never corrected. In the hall he heard the cupboard door. "Out," Vernon said low and urgent. "Out of there. Go upstairs. No kitchen. Scrape the potatoes. And if I hear one word—" Hannibal did not look. He stood at the window instead, gazing meditatively out at Privet Drive, at the neat row of houses in which, presumably, many children were at this moment being fed. A very small sound came from the hallway behind him, the pad of bare feet on carpet. The kitchen door opened. The kitchen door closed. The cupboard door clicked empty. He exhaled very slowly, as a man exhales who has made a decision he had not quite been intending to make. Then he let himself quietly out of the house and drove to the shops. The butcher on the Magnolia Road was a man of 50 with a good eye and a clean apron. Hannibal bought from him a saddle of lamb, which the butcher admired aloud, and a quantity of fresh calf's liver, which the butcher also admired, and certain other offerings for which the butcher was less qualified to offer an opinion. He paid in cash. He took the neat paper packages in a leather grip he had brought from the car. On the way back to Privet Drive, he stopped at a greengrocer's for mushrooms and garlic and a handful of thyme, and at a shop that sold foreign things for a bottle of something Chianti adjacent at a decent price, and at the off-license for a very good sauterne, which he paid for in a different note than he had paid the butcher. He carried all of this back to number 4 in the slanted gold of an English summer evening. A woman watering her fuchsia hedge at number 6 waved at him, mistaking him for someone else's guest. He waved back. He thought, a decent neighborhood, a decent row of wives, a child locked in a cupboard at the center of it, like a pearl inside a particularly stupid oyster. The kitchen of number 4 was cleaner than most operating theaters, and not quite so sterile. Petunia, pink with the honor of having a doctor cook in her kitchen, fluttered until Hannibal gently persuaded her into the sitting room with a glass of the sauterne. Vernon he placed at the kitchen table with a tumbler of beer and an instruction to slice a baguette very thin. Vernon had the honest confusion of a man discovering that he enjoyed being ordered about by someone better dressed than himself. Dudley he did not see at first. Dudley came in presently out of breath, smelling of children's crisps, and was given a job moving spoons from one drawer to another, which Dudley did with an absorbed and hostile concentration. The thin boy was not visible. Hannibal did not ask after him. He set out his knives. He set out his mise en place. He worked at a pace that was unhurried and very efficient. He was a pleasure to cook with because he did not speak, which left the Dursleys free to speak, and Englishmen, given half a pretext, cannot help but speak. Vernon spoke of his company, of drills, of the sales figures of a competitor, of the incompetence of a supplier. He spoke with vehemence of the cost of petrol. Petunia from the sitting-room doorway spoke of the neighbors. Dudley, encouraged, spoke of his enemies at the prep school. The kitchen filled with the smell of thyme and garlic and browning lamb. The sauterne was poured out and poured out again. At the hinge of the evening, Hannibal looked up from the pan over the stainless rim of a fine pair of tongs and said with the mildest possible curiosity, "I understood there was a second child, Harry." Vernon's face did not exactly change. It completed a transaction with itself. "He eats in the cupboard," he said, as if saying, "He has been taught to sit in the cupboard like a dog." "Of course," said Hannibal, "perhaps after dinner. A very small bowl, I'll fix it myself." "Very kind," said Petunia with real relief. She had begun to worry that the doctor would insist on sharing a table with the boy. The doctor had not insisted. The doctor was, she had decided in the sitting room over her second glass, a very fine man. They ate at the dining room table with the good napkins. Vernon ate loudly and with the concentration of a man for whom chewing was an event. Petunia ate in the poking, rodent fashion that nervous thin women adopt when they have been told to enjoy something. Dudley ate with both elbows. Hannibal ate without appearing to eat at all, as was his habit when the food was being served primarily as a test. The lamb at a certain point made Vernon silent. The silence was of the particular kind that Hannibal had been waiting for, a small, reverent silence, the silence of a man who discovers that his mouth has been full for 3 seconds before his brain caught up. "This is, by God, this is a small recipe," Hannibal said, "a single extra ingredient often overlooked, a matter of respect for what one is eating." "Where did you get the butcher on Magnolia Road speaks highly of you, Mr. Dursley," Hannibal said. "He tells me you are discerning. I thought you might appreciate the cut. The saddle was from the butcher, the liver was from the butcher." The single extra ingredient Hannibal had brought in himself in a small enamel tin and was not from a butcher. Vernon Dursley, with no suspicion at all of what he had just thanked him for it. The sedative which Hannibal had introduced an hour earlier in the sauterne, and which was a careful and gentle thing, not a cruel one, took its time. It was not his intent to harm the Dursleys, not tonight in this house, in this country that was not his hunting ground. It was his intent to keep them seated where he could see them. He had developed, over the years, a delicate pharmacology for these encounters, the dose in the sauterne for Petunia, a different dose in the beer for Vernon, calibrated for the body mass of a man who had not been kind to his wife. A small, very small dose in a glass of fizzy drink for Dudley, who ought to have been asleep anyway at his age after that much pudding. He watched Vernon's eyes lose focus at the same moment that Vernon's mouth forgot to close. He watched Petunia set her fork down carefully, saying, "Oh dear, I do feel," and stop there. He watched Dudley very gently slide sideways along the sofa cushion to which he had retreated after dinner and come to rest against the upholstered arm, snoring. There was now in number 4 Privet Drive a very particular kind of silence. It was the silence of a house in which 3 people were breathing deeply and 1 person was not. Hannibal washed up the kitchen. He washed up the kitchen because it seemed polite, and because he wanted the Dursleys, when they woke in the morning with thundering heads, to find the house tidier than they had left it. He wanted the tidy kitchen to sit in their imaginations afterward like a small, insoluble nail. He wanted them to wonder for the rest of their lives whether the doctor had come at all. The official report would never arrive. There was no official report. There was no doctor registered in Surrey by that name at that address. The visit, like a dream, would recede. They would reach for it in the weeks and months to come and find that it had thinned. When the kitchen was clean, he went out into the hall and he opened the cupboard under the stairs. The boy was awake. He was sitting on a folded blanket on the narrow, bare mattress, his knees drawn up, a torch in his hand. He had been reading something with the torch. He did not startle at the door. His eyes, behind the taped glasses, moved once across Hannibal's face, not a frightened glance, not a hopeful one, but the wide, quick appraisal of a small creature that has learned, very young, that to survive one must understand at once what kind of large creature one has met. "Good evening," Hannibal said. "Good evening, sir," the boy said. The voice was very small and very dry and very polite. "You have been reading?" "Yes, sir. May I see?" The boy hesitated. Then he held out the book. It was a paperback of David Copperfield from which the cover had fallen. Hannibal held it by the spine and let it fall open to the place the boy had been. A scrap of paper was folded in as a bookmark. Hannibal looked at the scrap of paper, which was, he saw, a page torn from another book, on which the boy had written in a tiny, careful hand a short list of words and definitions. He was teaching himself with a torch in a cupboard under some stairs. "Do you know my name?" Hannibal said. "No, sir." "Dr. Lecter, may I sit?" There was no chair in the cupboard. Hannibal sat on the threshold with his long legs in the hall. He laid the book carefully on the mattress beside the boy. "Your uncle and aunt and cousin have fallen asleep," he said. "They are very tired. They will sleep until morning. They will be quite well." The boy's eyes moved again in that small, wide, appraising way. "You are not from the school," the boy said. It was not a question. "No," said Hannibal, "I am not from the school." "Then I am from nowhere in particular," said Hannibal. "I was passing through." The boy absorbed this. He did not ask why Hannibal had come into his house and made his relatives sleep. Hannibal watched him decide not to ask. It was an adult decision made by a child. "Harry," said Hannibal, "I have 2 questions for you. They are the most important questions I shall ask you in the next year. Will you answer them for me honestly? I shall answer any question you ask me afterward with the same courtesy." "Yes, sir. The first question. When did you last eat something you chose for yourself?" The boy thought. He thought with the seriousness that some children bring to arithmetic. After a long time he said, "I don't know, sir. I thought as much." The second question. "If you could leave this house tonight and not return, would you?" A much longer silence. The boy's eyes did not fill with tears. They did something stranger and to Hannibal more satisfying. They clarified. It was as though a very thin film of grease had been wiped from a window. "Yes," said the boy very quietly. "I would." "Good," Hannibal said. "Go upstairs, please. Take the second smallest of the bedrooms and choose 5 objects you wish to keep. Leave the rest. There are a hairbrush and toothbrush in the upstairs bathroom. Take them. Do not take any of your cousin's possessions. Do not take money. Do not take photographs of your uncle and aunt and cousin. If there is any photograph of your mother or father, bring it. If there are any letters, bring them. You have 8 minutes. The boy at this finally looked very young. "Yes, sir," he said. "One other thing." "Yes, sir. My name," said Hannibal, "is still Dr. Lecter for today. By tomorrow, if you wish, it may be something else." 8 minutes later, the boy, Harry Potter, was in the hall with a pillowcase containing a small heap of items, the total weight of which amounted to perhaps 2 kilograms. Hannibal inspected the pillowcase by a kind of courtesy and found in it what he had expected and a little more. A pair of trousers mended repeatedly at the knee, a single woolen jumper, a pair of socks without holes, a pair of socks with holes, a hairbrush, a toothbrush, a photograph of a red-haired woman and a dark-haired man laughing in somebody's garden, an envelope of baby hair tied in yellow thread, and a paperback copy of David Copperfield without its cover. "Well chosen," said Hannibal. He held out his hand. The boy looked at it, then he took it. They left number 4 Privet Drive at 9:15 at night. Hannibal did not lock the door behind them, let the door be found open by the next-door neighbor in the morning, at the same time that the Dursleys were stirring from a sleep of unusual depth, let the neighbor's curiosity supply, if it wished, a story they could not, between them, quite assemble. The street was quiet. A curtain twitched at number 6. The lamp over the front door of number 4 was the only lamp on Privet Drive still lit. Hannibal's car, a long, dark sedan with soft seats, had been parked for most of the afternoon around the corner on Wisteria Walk. He opened the passenger door himself. The boy climbed in. Hannibal belted him. The boy had never in his life been belted into the front seat of a car by an adult. His face did not know what to do with it. "Put this on," Hannibal said, handing him a soft woolen coat from the back seat. "The air will be colder farther north." "Where are we going, sir?" "Tonight," said Hannibal, "to an hotel in London. Tomorrow to the ferry. The day after to a house in Florence. There is a room in it on the second floor with a window over the Arno. I think you will like the window." "Sir, yes. What did you put in their dinner?" Hannibal smiled, not unkindly. He pulled the car out from the curb with the long, smooth motion of a man who understood its engine. "Only a small thing," he said, "nothing they will miss." The motorway, when they reached it, was a stream of red and white lights. Hannibal drove at a moderate legal speed. He did not hurry. He had not hurried in his life, and he did not intend to begin. At his right hand in the passenger seat, the small boy in the too large coat sat very still. The boy did not cry. The boy did not sleep. The boy watched the road. Outside Slough, Hannibal said almost idly, "Tell me, Harry, when did you last eat something you chose for yourself?" Harry considered with the same seriousness as before. "Tonight, sir," he said. "I chose the apple from the bowl in the hall when no one was looking." "Good," said Hannibal. "That is a beginning." They drove on into the night. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The Education of a Small Wolf. The second-floor window of the Palazzo Capponi looked north across the Arno. In the mornings a long slant of sun entered by it, crossed the terracotta floor, touched the foot of the bed, and failing to find the bed occupied, climbed the white counterpane and arrived at last at Harry Potter's open eyes. He had slept through the night. He had slept through the night in a bed he had been told, by a man he was not yet sure how to address, was his. For the first 3 weeks he had waked before the sun and lain there wide and small in the middle of the mattress, listening to the city outside the shutters, calculating. He had counted doors. He had counted exits. He had made in his mind a map of the palazzo, floor by floor, in case he needed to run. On the 22nd morning he had not woken before the sun. On the 23rd morning he had not woken before the sun. By the 40th morning he had begun to wake with the sun, which is a different thing. The man in whose house he now lived was called, officially, Dr. Lecter. Unofficially, the man had indicated without indicating that he would not object to other forms of address. It had not been a speech. It had been a small silence at breakfast the morning after they had landed in Pisa, when Harry had asked a question beginning with "Sir," and the man had looked up from his espresso in a way that said, "That word has done its work, choose another." Harry had tried once Dr. Lecter and had been permitted it. He had tried once uncle and had seen the word land on the man's face like a small unclean insect and had not tried it again. For a week he had used no word at all. Then one evening in the thin hour when the lamps in the study were lit, and Hannibal had been reading Dante aloud in the original and translating as he went, Harry had said very quietly, "Father, what does that line mean?" He had not meant to say father. The word had come out of some older place in him that he had not previously known was there. Hannibal had not looked up from the page, but his free hand, resting on the arm of the chair, had very slightly relaxed. Harry had understood that he had chosen correctly. That had been 2.5 years ago. He was 10 now, going on 11. He was still small, though less thin. The glasses on his face were no longer mended with tape. He had been fitted, by a patient Florentine Audico, for a slim pair of tortoiseshell frames in which he did not look like a character out of Dickens. His hair, which had never known a brush with any authority, had not been forced to obey one. It had only been trimmed every 6 weeks by a man in a quiet shop in the Oltrarno who took the task seriously. He had grown 2 inches in the first 3 months, which the pediatrician, a discreet Milanese, had said was what happened when a child who had been going hungry stopped going hungry. He had grown another 3 inches in the following year. He had a cheekbone now, which was a new development. He had on one forearm a thin pale scar he had not previously had. That was also new. The education had proceeded like this. In the mornings, Italian with Signora Rondolino, who did not speak English and had not been told she was meant to. By the 2nd month, Harry was reading Calvino with a finger under the line. By the 6th, the finger was no longer necessary. Signora Rondolino had once laid her hand on his head and said in Italian, "Sei un ragazzo strano," a strange boy. She had not meant it unkindly. He had said, "Grazie, signora," which had amused her. After Italian, Latin. Latin was Hannibal himself, at the long table in the upstairs library, with a battered school edition of Caesar and an unbattered, lovely edition of Cicero, and an hour glass that he turned every 20 minutes. The ritual of turning the glass had pleased Harry at first with its quaintness, and then had come to please him with its meaning. There was no clock in the library. The lesson did not end when the lesson was over. The lesson ended when the glass had been turned 3 times. One did not complain to the glass. After Latin, an interval. He was permitted to go out. He was expected to go out. He walked across the Ponte Vecchio and up to the Piazza della Signoria or down to the markets at San Lorenzo. He was given, in a small leather wallet with his initials embossed, a small allowance in lire for which he was not required to account. He came back with fruit or a book he had not been told to buy, or once memorably, with an odd brass key he had found in the gutter on Via Maggio, which Hannibal had looked at with great interest and identified as a 19th-century postal key for a building on the Lungarno a Chiaiuoli. It was not clear why this was important. It had nonetheless gone into a drawer. After the interval, music. Hannibal kept a harpsichord in the salon and a theremin in a case under the harpsichord. He did not play the theremin in Harry's hearing in those first months, but he taught Harry, step by step, the clean, clear fingering of the harpsichord. Harry, who had a small good ear, learned to play the simpler of the Bach 2-part inventions without disgrace. He was better at listening than at playing. Hannibal did not correct this imbalance. The listening, he had said once, is the deeper discipline. After music, an hour Hannibal called with some ceremony, the quiet hour. They would sit together in the salon and name smelled. Hannibal would bring in from a cabinet in the pantry a small wooden tray on which were laid 4 or 5 objects, a slice of lemon, a piece of saddle soap, the cotton of a much-worn handkerchief, a folded scrap of sealing wax, a strand of horsehair from the bow of the 2nd violin of the Fiesole Orchestra, and Harry would sit with his eyes closed and learn to tell them apart. Later, when Harry had mastered the inanimate, Hannibal had begun to introduce people. A guest would leave. Harry would be asked at the door what that man had smelled of beyond his cologne, what that woman had eaten for breakfast, whether the 3rd guest at the dinner last Tuesday had been afraid, and of what. At first Harry had thought the exercise fanciful. By the end of the 1st year he could identify Signora Rondolino with his eyes closed at a distance of 4 meters. A nose, Hannibal said, is a library. Most people never learn to read in it. After the quiet hour, a meal. The meals were from the beginning the lesson that contained all other lessons. At the long mahogany table, laid each evening with the same linen, Harry learned the names of what he ate. He learned the difference between olive oil that had been pressed the previous October and olive oil that had been pressed 3 years ago. He learned to tell, by eye, the age of a piece of Parmigiano. He learned that the wine was, very occasionally, permitted, that it was never forced. He learned to hold a knife so that the tendons of the wrist did the work and not the fingers. He learned to eat silently and more difficult to speak during a meal without noise. He learned that food, when it was being eaten at Hannibal's table, was not to be rushed, that the one unforgivable thing, once a plate had been set before him, was to fail to attend to it. He learned, in a conversation he could not afterward quite date, what Hannibal preferred his guests not know. It had been on a Friday in the 4th month. A man had been to dinner on Thursday, a pale Austrian in a good suit, who had spoken at length about the failings of a mutual acquaintance, and had eaten 3 helpings of the veal. Hannibal had listened to him with the precise and steady attention he brought to any vice being cultivated in his presence, and had nodded at the appropriate intervals, and had not invited the Austrian back. Harry had observed the next morning at breakfast that the newspaper reported the disappearance of a man in a good suit from an hotel near the station. He had folded the paper down at the page and had looked across the coffee pot and had said without preamble, "Was that last night?" Hannibal had not pretended not to understand. In part, he had said, Harry had put a small spoonful of honey into his yogurt and had stirred it in. "Do you do that?" he had said. "Often, not often, only when it is, in my view, necessary." "And how do you decide that it is, in your view, necessary?" Hannibal had set down his cup. There had been a silence long enough for Harry to hear the pigeons outside the shutters. Then Hannibal had said, "I decide it by the standards of my table. Rudeness, Harry, is the ground of most of the world's unhappiness. I cannot eradicate it, no man can, but in my own small compass I can decline to pass it on. When a person is, in my considered judgment, a source of rudeness that will not be cured by any other intervention, I remove them. I do not do it casually, I do it when I do it with attention. And you, Harry, yes, finish the sentence, please. I should like to hear it in your own voice." Harry had finished it. "And you eat them, when it is appropriate." Harry had thought about this with his spoon suspended above the yogurt. He had thought about it with the same seriousness he brought to Latin verbs. He had thought about Vernon Dursley, who had eaten the lamb on Privet Drive, whom Hannibal had not eaten and had, indeed, let go. He had thought about the Austrian. He had thought about many things he did not say. "Father," he had said, "yes, will you make me do it? Number, will you be disappointed if I do not? Number, will you ever lie to me about it? Number, will you lie to me about anything else?" "I shall endeavor," Hannibal had said, "not to." Harry had eaten the yogurt. His hand had shaken twice. His face had not changed. They had read the rest of the newspaper together. At the end of breakfast he had said in a thoughtful voice, "I should not like to be rude at your table, Father," and Hannibal had laughed, a small dry laugh, the first time Harry had ever heard him laugh, and had said, "No, Harry, you never have been." They had not discussed it again for some months. It did not need to be discussed. It was a fact in the house, like the harpsichord, like the view from the upstairs window, like the great black umbrella in the hall stand. Harry carried it with him everywhere and carried it so lightly that a stranger would not have seen it. The carrying, he had understood, was itself a skill. His magic had begun properly that spring. It had begun with the pitcher. He had been carrying a Sevres pitcher of water from the kitchen to the dining room, and his foot had caught the edge of a rug, and the pitcher had jerked out of his hand. He had known in the suspended instant of its falling that it was going to break on the terracotta floor, and that he was going to have to tell Hannibal that he had broken it, and that the pitcher was very old. He had looked at it falling and had, with all the desperate small power of a child who does not want to disappoint, willed it not to break. It had not broken. It had hung for perhaps half a second in the air at the height of his knee, and had then resettled itself gently on the floor without spilling a drop. He had stood, small and immobile, and had stared at the pitcher. Hannibal, emerging from the dining room, had taken in the scene with one unhurried pass of his eyes. He had not said anything at all. He had bent and picked up the pitcher and had carried it into the dining room and had set it on the sideboard. Then he had come back and had laid one hand briefly on the crown of Harry's head, the first time he had ever touched Harry except to shake his hand or guide him by the elbow through a door, and had said in a voice without surprise, "We shall speak of this after dinner, Harry. Do not be alarmed. I have been expecting it." That night in the upstairs study with the lamps on, Hannibal had told him, in simple and careful language, what he believed Harry to be. He had not yet known, then, the whole of it. He had not yet made the trip to Edinburgh that he would make in the autumn, to a closed library in the new town where, in exchange for a certain service, a certain old Scot in a certain old chair would tell him. Over a small glass of whiskey Hannibal did not drink. The rest of the story, the war, the Potters, the man in the white mask, the scar, the night of the attack, the reason a small child had been delivered to a cupboard in Surrey by people who ought to have known better. That conversation would be had 6 months later. In the spring, in the Florentine study, Hannibal had simply told Harry what he had pieced together from the monographs he had already read in 3 languages, and from a brief correspondence he had had, under another name, with a retired Hungarian scholar in Budapest. That there were in the world people who were called by themselves wizards, that Harry's parents had in all likelihood been among them, that what had happened in the kitchen with the pitcher would happen again, and more, and that they would, together in the coming years, work out what to do with it. Harry had listened. He had asked 2 questions. First, is it bad? Number second, do you have it too? No, Hannibal had said, I have other disciplines, they will serve. Harry had nodded. That had been the end of that evening's lesson. He had gone to bed early. He had slept for 9 hours, which was long for him, and had woken with the knowledge of what he was settled into him like a small stone placed in a pocket. The magic once named had behaved with more dignity. It had not vanished. It had, if anything, increased. Over the following year Harry had, at various points, unlatched a door at a distance of 3 meters without walking to it, relit a guttering candle by looking at it, caused a wasp that had settled on his wrist and stung him to drop off the wrist dead, coaxed a cat that would not come when called to come when called, made a book on a high shelf slide out a 1/4 inch, which was as much as he needed for his fingertips. Some of these he had done on purpose, some he had not. He had kept a quiet diary in a black leather notebook, which sat on the small desk in his bedroom. in which he wrote down the occasions with the care of a naturalist, recording the habits of a small, rare bird. Hannibal read the diary when Harry left it open, which Harry sometimes did on purpose and sometimes did not. They discussed the entries at the dinner table, in the way that other families discussed the day's mail. The Memory Palace had been introduced in the second year, when they moved for 6 months to Baltimore. They had gone to Baltimore because Hannibal had certain obligations there, a private practice he had neither quite closed nor quite kept open, a handful of patients to whom he owed in his own private accounting a courtesy or two, and because he felt that a boy Harry's age ought to see more than one country, more than one climate, more than one kind of street. The townhouse in Baltimore was narrower than the palazzo, and the light was different, and the food at the market was not as good. Harry did not say so. He was not ungrateful. He was only in the privacy of his mind comparing. It was in the Baltimore study, with snow falling on a long gray street outside, that Hannibal had first laid out on the rug a hand-drawn floor plan of a building Harry did not recognize. This, Hannibal had said, touching the outer wall with the tip of a pencil, is not a real building. It is a building I have carried in my head since I was your age. It has 72 rooms. Each room contains a single thing I wish to remember, placed in a single location in the room, to which and to no other location I have attached it. Would you care to learn how to build such a building of your own? Yes, Harry had said. They had worked at it for months. Harry's palace had begun as a small stone cottage with 1 room, had become, by the new year, a cottage with 4 rooms, had become, by the spring, a proper manor house with a staircase and a drawing room and a study. Into it he had placed, one at a time, all the things he had decided he did not wish to lose. The smell of his mother's perfume, which he had recovered from the envelope of baby hair he had brought in the pillowcase. The sound of Hannibal's footsteps on the tiled floor at a particular distance. The exact shade of the water in the Arno in March. The face of Mrs. Figg from Wisteria Walk, whom he had decided to keep for reasons he could not articulate. The feeling of being hungry, which he did not wish to mislay lest he lose sympathy with those who still were. The face of Vernon Dursley, which he kept in a small locked cabinet in an upstairs room, to be looked at occasionally and never often. The palace was very useful. It was useful as a library. It would prove later to be useful as something else. There had been during the Baltimore period an incident at the prep school. The school had not been a prep school of the first order. Hannibal had chosen it precisely on the grounds that Harry would be bored there, and that being bored was a discipline. Harry had sat in the back of classrooms in which he was, at 10, reading 3 years ahead of his classmates, and had listened, without appearing to be anything but attentive, to the gossip of 10-year-olds. He had learned a great deal about 10-year-olds. He had formed no friendships. He had not wanted to. There had been among the 10-year-olds a boy larger than the rest, whose habit was to push. The boy had pushed Harry once in the corridor in the second week. Harry had picked himself up and had continued walking. The boy had pushed him again on the last day of the second week, harder. Harry had picked himself up and had continued walking. On the Monday of the third week, in the boys' lavatory, the boy had come up behind Harry with the clear intention of pushing him into a basin. The boy had not been able to draw breath. It had come on him as a thin pressure around the throat, as of unseen hands, not hard enough to mark the skin and not soft enough to permit speech. The boy had opened his mouth. No air had gone in. The boy's eyes had bulged. He had dropped to his knees. He had made the small wheezing noise that precedes unconsciousness. Harry had watched him. He had watched him for the length of perhaps 2 breaths of his own, a length of time he afterward remembered precisely because it had been long enough to contain an entire decision. He had felt in those 2 breaths the shape of what it would be to let the pressure continue for another minute. He had felt it as a specific warmth in his chest. He had noted the warmth. He had then, with a small and distinct effort, lifted the pressure off. He had done it the way one lifts the pressure of a finger off a piano key. The boy had fallen sideways onto the tiles. He had gulped air. He had wept. Harry had said in a quiet voice, "Stop pushing people," and had walked out of the lavatory. The boy had not, for the remainder of the time Harry attended the school, so much as looked at him in the corridor. Hannibal had collected Harry from the school that afternoon, as on every afternoon, in a long gray American car. Harry had sat in the passenger seat. For the first 3 blocks Hannibal had said nothing. Then, idly turning onto North Charles Street, he had said, "You might have kept him. You were kind." Harry had not asked how Hannibal knew. Hannibal always knew. Harry had said only, "I did not want him." A precise reason. Yes, good, Hannibal had said. Imprecision is a kind of rudeness as well. They had driven on. By the spring of that year they had returned to Florence. Harry had grown another inch. He had mastered the Goldberg variations at a tempo that was his own and not Bach's, but was not disgraceful. He had read most of Tacitus. He had taught himself from a slightly irresponsible book he had bought at a stall by the Mercato Central, enough of the language of falconry to understand the plates in a handsomer book he had afterward been given as a birthday present. His 11th birthday had been observed at his own request quietly. A small fish grilled over charcoal on the back terrace, 2 candles and a little cake with cardamom in it, and a long afternoon on the terrace with a book in which Hannibal had let him alone. On the evening of his 11th birthday, as they were crossing the hall to the dining room, Hannibal had put one hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, the light touch that meant something was about to be said, and had said, "A letter will come this summer from England. You should know that in advance." "What kind of letter?" "An invitation, I think, to a school. It will come by owl." By owl, yes. Harry had thought about this. He had weighed the word owl. He had allowed himself for a moment to want the owl. Then he had put the wanting of the owl into a drawer in the 3rd room of his palace, to be looked at only when useful. "Shall we accept, father?" he had said. "We shall consider it when it arrives," Hannibal had said. "Rudeness, as you know, travels in many forms. School is a particular form of it. I shall not wish to send you anywhere to which you would prefer not to go. On the other hand, you will want at some point to meet others of your kind. You will want it, Harry, even if you do not yet know that you want it." "Yes, father." "Also," Hannibal had said, stopping in the doorway and looking at him with a quality of interest that had always, in Harry's experience, meant the real sentence was about to be uttered, "I should very much like to see what your kind's idea of a school looks like from the outside. It is not the sort of building I have been inside. I have a professional curiosity." Harry had smiled. It had been perhaps the 6th or 7th time he had smiled in the house in Florence. He had been saving the smiles. Hannibal had observed the smile with the dignity of a connoisseur observing a small new vintage, and had inclined his head. The letter came 6 weeks later. It arrived at 9:30 on a morning in late July, in a beak. The owl was pale brown and unconcerned. It alighted on the balcony railing outside the breakfast room, walked 3 stiff steps along the stone, tapped at the glass with its left foot once, and when the French doors had been unlatched and drawn open by Hannibal, who had not, even in the face of a strange bird at his window, done anything in a hurry, hopped inside and deposited a thick yellow envelope on the breakfast table beside the coffee pot. Then it regarded Hannibal. Hannibal regarded it. He had the look, for one blink, of a man who was very much enjoying himself without letting it show. "Permit me," he said, and went to the sideboard and cut a thin slice of yesterday's roasted wood pigeon, and laid it on a small white saucer and brought the saucer to the owl. The owl accepted the offering with the air of a foreign ambassador accepting a negotiated concession. It ate the wood pigeon. It drank from a finger bowl of water Hannibal placed before it. It stretched its wings, satisfied, and flew out past the ironwork and up the line of the Arno. Hannibal closed the French doors. He brought the envelope to Harry. The envelope was addressed in green ink in a hand that seemed to have been dipped in Victorian courtesy. "Mr. H. Potter, the 2nd bedroom on the upper floor, Palazzo Capponi, Florence, Italia." Harry turned it over. On the back was a wax seal bearing a crest of 4 animals, a lion, an eagle, a badger, a serpent. "Rudeness travels in many forms, Harry," said Hannibal mildly. "Shall we accept?" "Yes, father," said Harry. He broke the seal. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Diagon Alley. Dressed accordingly, Minerva McGonagall had been sent to the Leaky Cauldron on a Tuesday morning in early August for what Albus had described as a routine errand. This had struck her as remarkable, even for him. Nothing concerning the Potter child had ever, in 11 years of anxious speculation, been routine. She had expected to find Hagrid waiting at the bar, enormous and fond, with a tea that had gone cold twice. Hagrid had been recalled to Hogwarts that morning. It had turned out, for a matter involving a nesting manticore and an inadequate wall, and Minerva had been dispatched in his place at short notice. She had expected, she permitted herself to note, as she adjusted the tartan at her collar in the lobby's small mirror, that the Dursleys would be difficult. Petunia had always been difficult. It had been Minerva's private opinion, on a bench of grass outside a certain house in Little Winging 10 years ago, that leaving a child with Petunia had been a mistake of such magnitude that it was likely to outlive them all. She had said so. She had been overruled. She had, with the iron courtesy of her clan, obeyed. The boy she expected to find, therefore, was a pale little thing in hand-me-down shoes, flanked by an aunt with pursed lips and an uncle too large for the doorway. The boy she did find was alone at a corner table in the back of the public room, with a cup of chocolate steaming at his elbow and a slim brown book open before him. He was wearing a dark wool coat of excellent cut. His hair had been washed. His glasses were new. He had the unhurried posture of someone who had been taught to wait for people. He looked up as she came in, and she had the briefest impression that she had been catalogued and filed before she had quite crossed the threshold. At the table next to his sat a man who was, without question, the most dangerous-looking person in the room, and who was sipping a small cup of coffee as if danger had never crossed his mind. Professor McGonagall, the man said. He rose. He was of medium height and quiet bearing. He had a narrow, clean-shaven face, hair the color of an old pewter, and eyes set deep under fine eyebrows. He wore a gray suit with the discretion of a man for whom a gray suit was a decision. I am Dr. Hannibal Lecter. I have the honor of being Mr. Potter's guardian. Please do join us. Guardian, Minerva said. Yes, I was informed that the boy lived with his aunt. An arrangement that ceased to obtain some years ago, said Hannibal Lecter, drawing out the chair opposite his own with the ease of an old waiter. Please, a cup of tea. Tom knows how I take it. He will know how you take yours. She sat down because the alternative was to stand in the middle of a public room and demand explanations that a man of his evident composure was plainly in no hurry to supply. Tom the barman, at the raising of a single Lecter eyebrow, was at their table already with a pot. It was her tea. She noted the pot before she noted the cup. The cup was the same. The pot was not the one Tom brought to Wizards. I have, said Hannibal, permitting Tom to withdraw with a nod of thanks that seemed to make Tom's shoulders a half-inch higher on the way back to the bar. Some letters I should like you to read before we continue. He produced from a slim leather folder on the chair beside him 3 items. A medical certificate in the name of a Swiss pediatrician, attesting that Mr. Harry James Potter, born 31 July 1980, had, on his recent 11th year examination, been found in excellent health. A school transcript from the International Academy of St. Ambrose, Florence, attesting that Mr. Potter had, in the preceding 2 academic years, attained results nel primo decile della classe in Italian, Latin, mathematics, history, geography, and music, with a note in elegant Italian indicating that the student was diligent, attento, di una quiet precoce. A document on heavy paper in French from a Swiss notary, attesting that the undersigned Dr. H. Lecter was the legal guardian of the aforementioned minor, by arrangement executed in Geneva on the 15th of November 1987, countersigned by a magistrate whose name Minerva did not recognize and whose seal she did not quite know what to do with. The paperwork, said Hannibal politely, is, I am afraid, of the Muggle kind. I shall defer, of course, to whatever process your own community finds more agreeable, but I trust the documents set your mind at ease as to my standing. Minerva read them twice. They were very clean. They were very quiet. They were of the particular kind of cleanness and quietness that set off, in her long-trained teacher's ear, a small warning bell. She chose, for the moment, to ignore it. I have no notice in our records, she said, of this arrangement. I should be astonished if you had. The matter was managed entirely on the Muggle side. It was my understanding that your community had no particular interest in the boy's domestic situation so long as there was one. If that understanding is mistaken, I apologize. I will answer any question you wish to put to me. Where is the boy's aunt? At home, I expect, in Little Winging. I have not been in contact with Mrs. Dursley for some years. And Mr. Potter consents to this arrangement. Ask him, Hannibal said, with his hand open toward the boy at the next table, as if offering her a small dish of cream. She turned. The boy had not appeared to be listening, but his eyes had come up a half-second before her head moved, which confirmed to her that he had heard every word. He was holding a teaspoon in the way one holds a fountain pen. He was smiling very slightly. Mr. Potter, she said. Ma'am. Is this gentleman your guardian by your own choice? Yes, ma'am. Do you wish him to continue in that role? Yes, ma'am. Have you been mistreated? No, ma'am. Have you been frightened? No, ma'am. Have you, she said, and found that she had to steady her voice, eaten enough. The smile at the corner of his mouth moved a little and settled. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for asking. She sat for a while with the 3 documents in her lap and her tea cooling in her cup and the small noise of the leaky cauldron in the background. She was not a woman who cried in public. She was also, she was beginning to realize, not a woman who was being permitted, this morning, to conduct her errand in the fashion she had imagined. A decision was required of her. The decision was either to spend the rest of the day composing urgent letters to the headmaster and to a number of other parties, or to drink her tea and buy the boy his school things. She considered the 2 options with the small precision she brought to setting examinations. She drank her tea. Very well, she said. The letters can wait, have you? She added, addressing the boy, the list. Yes, ma'am, said Harry, and he produced from the breast pocket of his wool coat the Hogwarts letter, folded in thirds, and opened it for her. Let us begin, then, at Gringotts. Professor McGonagall. Yes, Dr. Lecter. Would you do me the courtesy of permitting me to accompany the boy? I would prefer it. They left the leaky cauldron by the back door. Diagon Alley in the late morning was a river of robes and cloaks and parchment lists, and children either delighted or overwhelmed. Minerva led, Harry walked on her right. Hannibal walked a precise half-pace behind Harry's left shoulder, which was the place from which a well-trained valet can observe most of a room without appearing to observe any of it. They made, as a group, an unusual silhouette. Wizards glanced once and then twice. One old witch in a turban reached for her friend's sleeve. Minerva, who knew how whispers traveled in a narrow street, set a faster pace. Gringotts stood at the crook of the alley like a large white bank that had got above itself. On the steps, a goblin in red livery held open the bronze doors and inclined his head minutely to Minerva, more minutely to Harry, and for a full half-second not at all to Hannibal. Hannibal inclined his in return just as precisely, with the effect of a single chess piece meeting another on a middle square. Inside, the marble floor and the long counters and the drifting quills of a dozen goblin clerks produced, in the uninitiated, a species of mild astonishment. Hannibal's face, Minerva observed sidelong, produced nothing. It was the face of a man in his own drawing room. He was interested, but he was not amazed. She filed this away. The clerk at the central counter was a goblin named Griffook. He was cold, he was efficient. He had the particular patience of his kind for the particular impatience of hers. He glanced at Harry's letter, glanced at Harry, glanced at Hannibal. At Hannibal his glance lingered a fraction of a second longer than at the others. Minerva could not have said what exchanged between them. Hannibal did not speak. Griffook did not ask. "The Potter vault," Griffook said, naming a number. They rode a cart to the vault. The cart ran on rails that bucked and swung. Hannibal on the bench seat sat as he had sat in the leaky cauldron, perfectly composed, one hand light on the rail, his coat unruffled. Harry on his other side sat the same way. Minerva, who had traveled this cart often enough to know that some wizards wept on it, watched the two of them out of the corner of her eye and felt, for the first time that morning, the small flicker of ordinary professional admiration she reserved, in her own private taxonomy, for pupils who handled themselves well. The vault door opened. The vault contained gold, proper wizarding gold, stacked with the quiet insolence of very old money. Harry did not reach for the piles at random. He counted out a calm handful of galleons, looked at Hannibal, who inclined his head to confirm that the sum was sufficient, and placed them into a small leather purse he had brought for the purpose. He did not take more than he would need. He did not touch the piles that were not to be counted today. "Mr. Potter," said Griffook, watching this operation with very dry approval, "if you wish, I can arrange for an annual statement of the vault to be sent to your guardian's address." "Thank you, Griffook." "That would be convenient." Hannibal produced a small card and offered it. Griffook took it without glancing at it, which meant he had already glanced at it. The card went into a pocket that seemed, to Minerva's ear, to close with a tiny metallic snap like the tongue of a very small trap. Back in the sunlight, Minerva consulted the list. "Robes," she said. "Madame Malkin's, is it not?" Hannibal said. "You have been here before." "In guidebook only, Professor. I am a voracious reader." The inside of Madame Malkin's smelt of new cloth and hot steam and chalk. A pale blonde boy was standing on the second footstool, unattended, having his hem pinned by a witch with pins in her mouth. He turned his head when the bell rang over the door. His eyes registered the arrivals and flickered briefly, the way a cat's eyes flicker when something new has walked into the room. "Hogwarts," he said. "Yes," said Harry. He took the first stool. "First year, yes, me too. My father is buying my books. I don't know why they insist on the whole of Bagshot, do you? I shall only read the interesting chapters." The boy's voice had the mixed brightness and brittleness of a child who had been told often that he was important. "You've got Italian shoes." "Where are you from then?" "Florence at the moment," said Harry politely. "Previously Little Winging, and you?" "Wiltshire." "My family has been there since before your aunt was, I expect. I'm Draco Malfoy." "Harry Potter." The witch, Madame Malkin herself, who had been trying to pin Harry's hem without making a scene, made a small involuntary sound around the pins. The boy Draco became very still. His eyes went to Harry's forehead, to the hairline where beneath the longer fringe the scar lay hidden. His glance did not find it. He adjusted his face. I had heard you were in the country," he said, recovering. "It's a pleasure. My father has spoken of yours. Have you been to many of the old families yet? We are giving a small evening at the manor at the end of the month, if you—" "That is kind," said Harry, "but I suspect my guardian and I shall be traveling." Draco's eyes slid sideways. At Hannibal he blinked. Hannibal had done nothing. It was the standing still that had caught Draco's attention. Harry in the mirror saw the blink and moved to diffuse it. "Draco," he said, "this is Dr. Lecter. Dr. Lecter, Mr. Malfoy." "Mr. Malfoy," said Hannibal. "I have had the pleasure of reading your father's contribution, some years ago, to the Journal of Magical History regarding the taxonomy of enchanted blades. I found it elegantly argued, although I ventured to differ at 1 or 2 points." Draco, who was 13 months old when his father had written the paper in question and had never seen it, said, "Ah, yes, well, thank you," in a voice like a small bell that had been struck by something it had not expected. The pins went back in, the hem was pinned, the robes were cut. The witch made small fussing compliments that Harry received with grave thanks. Outside in the sun again, Draco, having trailed them out onto the pavement, and having, to his visible disappointment, not been offered further conversation, parted with a stiff little bow and went back in for his remaining fitting. Minerva led the way down the alley to Flourish and Blots. "That child," Hannibal said, close to Harry's shoulder in Italian, "has been taught to make a display." "Yes, father, a nervous display. Yes, you handled him correctly. Thank you, father." Flourish and Blot smelt of old paper and older paper and of the particular soft mildew that books acquire when they have been loved without ever being opened. Minerva watched the boy move through the stacks. He found, quickly, the prescribed texts and set them on the counter with the impersonal efficiency of someone discharging a duty. Then, with a faint air of having completed the compulsory portion of the morning, he drifted off among the shelves. She found him 10 minutes later, reading the last paragraph of a book on the rise and fall of the late Dark Lord. The book was open in his hands. The book was being read, not skimmed. His eyes moved at the speed of a slow hand on a dial. He turned a page. He closed the book. He put it under his arm along with 2 others. The 2 others, she noted as he came past her, were a treatise on the old languages of the British Isles and a small, sober-looking volume entitled A Naturalist's History of Wizarding Blood. "Those are not on your list, Mr. Potter," she said mildly. "No, ma'am, any of them. No, ma'am. Shall I ask why?" "Because," said Harry, considering the cover of the book in his hands as if appraising its fitness, "I should like to understand how I am supposed to feel about a man who tried to kill me, before I meet anyone who is going to tell me how I am supposed to feel about him. I should also like to know a little about the old language of the place I am about to live in, which I have gathered is written down in odd fragments in odd places and is being allowed to die without much protest. And I should like, most of all, to know what the people I am about to meet mean when they use the word blood. I am told they use it in one of 3 ways, none of which is quite the same as the way a muggle uses it." Minerva stood holding her own small stack of books and said after a pause, "Very well, Mr. Potter, take them." "Thank you, ma'am." Ollivander's at the furthest end of the alley was exactly as Ollivander's had been for 100 years. Narrow shelves, dust that had learned long ago not to settle anywhere impolite, a single chair on which no one ever sat. Mr. Ollivander, emerging from between the shelves like a soft trick of the light, paused, adjusted his small silver spectacles, and looked, in order, at Minerva, at Harry, and at Hannibal. Inspection of Minerva took a second. His inspection of Harry took 6. His inspection of Hannibal took 9. "Mr. Potter," said Ollivander at last, in a voice as quiet as a turning page, "I wondered when I should see you. Your mother 10 1/4 inches willow, swishy, nice for charm work. Your father 11 inches mahogany, a little more power than Miss Evans's, good for transfiguration, excellent for a duel. Thank you, sir. Your arm." Harry extended his right. Ollivander measured. The measurements ran themselves. The first wand Ollivander brought down from its shelf fizzled. The second cracked a pane of glass at the back of the shop. The third set briefly fire to the hem of Minerva's robe. She extinguished it with a flick and a low, professional swear. The fourth produced sparks of a reasonable sort. Ollivander considered the sparks, decided against. The fifth Ollivander brought down from a very high shelf and handled with the careful reverence of a man returning a book to a colleague. 11 inches holly, a single phoenix tail feather. Harry took it. The wand warmed in his hand at once. A draught stirred from nowhere and lifted a lock of Harry's hair. A faint golden light traced the edge of his fingers for the space of a breath and went out. "Ah," said Ollivander. His eye had gone to the fringe of Harry's hair in the exact place beneath which the scar lay hidden. He did not ask, he knew. "Curious," he said, "curious." "Mr. Ollivander," said Hannibal, "I see from the look on your face that you are about to say something interesting. Please do." Ollivander looked at Hannibal. He looked at him for longer than was strictly polite. One of the bulbs overhead, which had been flickering on and off, settled into steady light. "I rarely feel in this shop, Mr. Lecter," said Ollivander quietly, "that I am being watched." "You are not being watched," said Hannibal. "You are being appreciated." Ollivander inclined his head. A very small nod, the kind a swordsmith might give a rival of the trade who had walked into the forge, 7 galleons for the wand, Mr. Potter. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. Outside in the alley again, Minerva said, Mr. Potter, have you eaten? Not since breakfast, ma'am. We shall find luncheon then. There is a place at the Gringotts End, if I may, said Hannibal. There is a shop 2 streets over, in a small lane off Carket Market, that I should very much like to visit, which I am told will take no more than 20 minutes, and we might then luncheon with excellent appetite at the place you suggest. Will you permit me to deprive you of Harry's company for those 20 minutes, Professor? She considered. Then she considered the proposition behind the proposition. Then, with the steady instinct that had, in 40 years of teaching, served her in good stead, she said, 20 minutes. Thank you. The shop in question was at the end of a quiet lane from which all the noise of the alley had been subtracted. There was no sign above the door. The window showed, on black velvet, 3 small knives laid precisely 3 inches apart. The man inside was old. He had the face of a gunsmith. The hands were a bladesmith's hands. Dr. Lecter, the man said. He had been expecting Hannibal. Hannibal had at some point in the preceding days been in touch. And Mr. Potter, an honor, sir. The items are on the long table at the back. Harry went with him. There were on the long table 6 small knives. 3 were folding, 3 were fixed. The blades were of different steels and different lengths. Each had worked into its grip, a charm of a kind Harry did not yet have the vocabulary for. The bladesmith said nothing while Harry walked down the table. He said nothing when Harry came back. He said nothing when Harry paused at the 3rd item, a folding knife with a handle of some pale, dense wood whose grain ran in a cool spiral. May I, said Harry, please. Harry took it up. It opened in his hand without pinching a finger, which was, Hannibal had once said, how one knew whether a knife understood one. He turned it in the light. He closed it. He opened it again. He held it in his palm for a moment as if listening to it. This one, he said. A good choice, said the bladesmith. The grip is bog oak, the blade is old Sheffield, forged before the wars. The charms on the handle will keep it from rusting, and will keep it from being drawn out of your hand unless you wish it drawn. You are not old enough technically to own it. We shall ignore the technicality. Thank you, sir. They paid in gold. They walked out into the alley. Hannibal did not say good. Hannibal did not need to. Luncheon with Minerva was at a small place near Gringotts, where she ate a mutton pie with the competence of a woman who had eaten many mutton pies, and Hannibal ate a single bowl of chestnut soup with the dispassionate courtesy of a man making polite conversation with a dish he had not ordered. Harry ate with evident pleasure a plate of roast beef, 2 potatoes, and a slice of treacle tart. It was the first treacle tart he had ever had. He approved of it. He said so. In the last hour of the afternoon, Minerva took them to platform 9¾ This was not, technically, on the list. She had offered to show Harry how to pass through the barrier. Hannibal had accepted with the grace of a man who understood that a small courtesy being offered should be permitted to be completed. They walked the length of King's Cross in the late afternoon light, the ordinary London crowd streaming past them, and paused at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Minerva explained it. Harry listened. He leaned experimentally a palm against the brickwork. The brickwork felt like brickwork. He stood back. On the 1st of September, Minerva said, you will do exactly this at 12 minutes to 11. The train will leave at 11 precisely. Thank you, Professor. I shall see you, Mr. Potter, at the sorting. Yes, Professor. Dr. Lecter, Professor. They shook hands. She had the distinct sense as she shook his hand that the hand she was shaking was the hand of a man for whom her shaking of it was a rare and specific concession. She let go before the impression could firm into a conclusion she was not ready to draw. If you will permit me, she said on a different thought, one last word, Mr. Potter. Of course. Be kind, she said, to the other children. He looked at her. There was something very old in the look for a boy of 11. Then the look softened in a way that was small and costly, and she understood later meant something. I shall try, ma'am, he said. She left them at the barrier. Hannibal walked Harry back through the station toward the car, which was waiting at a bay on Pancras Road. At the curb before Harry got in, Hannibal stopped and turned him lightly by the shoulder. He adjusted the collar of the wool coat which had come up against the back of Harry's neck. He looked at Harry for a full breath. Discourtesy, he said, is the only unforgivable sin, Harry. Even wizards seem to understand that after a fashion. Give them your courtesy before your friendship. Give them your friendship sparingly. When someone does you the discourtesy of trying to harm you, see to it without drama. Do not, on the other hand, take it upon yourself to see to the discourtesies that have not yet been done to you. Leave those to the future. The future, in my experience, is usually competent to supply them itself. Yes, father, I shall expect a letter every Sunday. Yes, father. If, said Hannibal as if it had just occurred to him, at any time in the next year you are in doubt, look at a clock and find the nearest hour and pause for 20 minutes before acting. If after 20 minutes the instinct remains, act. You have been and remain a person of excellent instincts. Yes, father, good. He held the car door open. Harry got in, he closed it. As the car pulled away from the curb, Harry looked back once through the rear window. Hannibal was standing on the pavement, hands folded behind his back, watching the car go. The late sun caught briefly the silver pin in his tie. Then the car turned onto the Euston Road and the figure was gone. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, sorting out the sheep. The Hogwarts Express was scarlet in a way English trains had for a very long time given up on being. Harry Potter stood with his trunk beside him on the platform of 9¾ and found, to his quiet amusement, that it was not the magic of the crossing or the owls in their cages or the cauldrons rolling in trolleys that pleased him. It was the paint. The scarlet was wet and confident. It had been put on the train that morning or the morning before by a man who took pride in his paint. Hannibal had not come onto the platform. They had arranged this between them. Hannibal would have drawn eyes. They had parted at the threshold of the barrier with the same small exchange as at King's Cross a month ago, a brief adjustment of a collar, a level look, a nod. Harry had stepped through the brickwork with his trolley and had not looked back. He had learned in his 3 years with Hannibal that looking back was a thing he permitted himself only once a day. He picked a compartment halfway down the train that had in it, at present, only a single boy about his own age and a round-faced boy with a toad. The round-faced boy was on his knees on the floor looking under the bench. The other boy was red-haired and freckled and was eating out of a napkin, a sandwich that had been packed several hours earlier and had had an adventure. "May I?" said Harry at the door. "Oh, yeah," said the redhead looking up. "Plenty of room. Lost your trunk somewhere." "No, it's in the corridor. I'll fetch it in a moment." Harry slid the door closed behind him, offered a hand to the boy on the floor, who accepted it gratefully, was pulled up, and immediately went back to looking and sat down by the window. He considered his companions. "Ron Weasley," said the red-haired boy, "Harry Potter." Ron Weasley's jaw did not drop, but his chewing paused. His eyes went, as Draco Malfoy's had gone, to Harry's hairline. Unlike Draco, Ron did not adjust his face. Ron's face adjusted itself. The shape of the adjustment was complicated. Respect, wariness, a small flare of boyish hope that here at last might be a possible friend, all layered under a thick anxiety of not being thought of as one of those. "Blimey," he said with an effort. "Sorry, I mean pleased to meet you. This is Neville Longbottom. He's lost his toad." "How long has he been missing?" said Harry kindly to Neville. "Since the trolley," said Neville mournfully. "Gran said he'd try something." "I'll help," said Harry. He set his trolley ticket down, took off his coat, and laid it neatly over the back of the seat. "I'm quite good at finding things. Trevor, is it?" "Yes, we shall find Trevor." They found Trevor 2 compartments down, in the lap of a girl who had opened the door to their knock with the distracted air of someone who had been reading a textbook and had not expected to be interrupted. Her hair was a voluminous brown. Her teeth were slightly too large for her mouth. Her eyes, when they landed on him, were the eyes of an animal that had been waiting all its life for another animal of the same species to come over the hill. "Oh," she said. "Yes, he hopped in. I've been trying to write down what I think he might eat, but I don't actually know, only sorry, I'm Hermione Granger. Who are you?" "I am Harry," said Harry, "and this is Neville, to whom the toad belongs, and behind me is Ron, who has come along to be a witness. Thank you for keeping him." "Oh," said Hermione, blinking, "you're welcome." He took the toad with some courtesy from her lap and returned it to Neville, who was so relieved he half sat down on the corridor floor. Harry, with his hand on the compartment door, paused. "Miss Granger." "Yes. Have you had luncheon? Would you care to take it with us? We have sandwiches that have not aged gracefully, but they are not aged maliciously. Our compartment is the one with the boy crying on the floor." Hermione considered him. She had been bracing, he saw, for the particular unkindness that large groups of unfamiliar 11-year-olds sometimes visited on a girl of her sort. The bracing dissolved by degrees. It left behind something careful and bright. "Yes," she said, "thank you, let me get my trunk." By the time the Hogwarts Express had passed York, the 4 of them were eating very bad sandwiches in the same compartment. By the time it had passed Newcastle, Draco Malfoy had opened the compartment door once, flanked by his 2 silent and slow-moving heavies, and had spoken 2 full sentences before realizing he had lost his audience. Harry had handled Draco with the same civility he had used in Madame Malkin's. He had offered Draco a sandwich. Draco had declined. Draco had gone away with the bewildered expression of a boy whose rehearsed script had been politely, comprehensively declined. "You were nice to him," Hermione said, watching the door slide shut. "He was nervous," said Harry, "and boys like that do unpleasant things when they are nervous. I thought I would spare us." "He'll be unpleasant anyway," said Ron. "Probably, but he will have to do it without my permission." They changed into their robes as the train climbed north. They arrived at Hogsmeade Station in the dusk, and Harry, along with the rest of the first years, was handed off, in a swirl of lantern light and confusion, to a very large man whose voice was kind and whose breath smelled of tea and brandy, and who herded them onto boats on a lake. The boats pulled themselves. Harry touched the water with the back of one finger once to see whether it was cold. It was cold. He did not touch it again. The castle from the water was all towers and windows and flaring torches. Harry looked at it as he would have looked at an unfamiliar opera house, with attention, with interest, without bowing. He could feel at the hairline a small pressure he had not felt in Diagon Alley, some kind of weather in the building, as if the walls breathed. It was the first piece of magic he had ever stood inside. He did not find it frightening. He found it interesting. It did, at one point as they climbed the slope from the boats, notice him back. A soft pressure settled briefly across his shoulders, like an old woman's hand laid on him through a coat, and was withdrawn. "Are you all right?" said Hermione beside him. "Yes," he said, "the entrance hall, the great staircase." McGonagall at the top of the staircase in green and silver with a scroll under her arm, a speech about the 4 houses. A short wait in the small antechamber while the great doors of the hall stood closed ahead of them. A small swarm of childhood ghosts drifted in and out, chattering, and drifted out and in. Harry stood very still, with Hermione at his right shoulder and Neville at his left and Ron behind, and listened. From beyond the doors came a polite hum. 1,000 voices arranged in 4s, then the doors opened. He walked down the aisle between the long tables with the small, precise steps Hannibal had taught him for walking in public rooms. He did not look at the staff table. He did not look for anyone's face. He kept his eyes level. He noted as he passed the Slytherin banners, green and silver snake, and the Gryffindor red and gold lion, and the Ravenclaw blue and bronze eagle, and the Hufflepuff yellow and black badger. He noted a stool in the middle of the front of the hall with a hat on it, which hat, at the moment of his arrival abreast of it, sat up and began to sing. The song was a song. Harry listened politely. It ended. McGonagall unrolled her scroll. He waded through the alphabet. Abbott Hannah, Bones Susan, Boot Terry, Brocklehurst Mandy, Brown Lavender, Bulstrode Millicent, Corner Michael. A young man put on the stool with a casual confidence that the hat, after a pause, rewarded with a Ravenclaw shout. Crab Vincent. He noted names. He noted faces. He made in a small lower room of his memory palace an alphabetical gallery of them and filed each as the hat announced a house. Dunbar Fay and Twistle Kevin. The girl before him was Granger, Hermione. The hat hesitated on Hermione's head for longer than it had on several of the others. At last it said Gryffindor. And Hermione, looking relieved and slightly amazed, went to the red and gold table. Ron, when he got there, went also to the red and gold table. Neville, sitting trembling on the stool, was placed after a long and respectful conversation into the same place. Potter, Harry. The hall did something the hall had not done for some of the other children. It exhaled. Harry walked up the 4 steps and took the stool. McGonagall lowered the hat. The hat settled in the way of old hats down over his ears. The noise of the hall fell away. He was inside a dim, calm place that smelled of wool and old paper. "Well," said the hat. "Good evening," Harry said. "I have sat on many heads, Mr. Potter," said the hat, "but not many built like this. I am sorry. Should I apologize? Number, I am a hat. I would not know where to put an apology. I see what is in you. There is hunger in you, yes, and a palace. Someone has taught you to build a palace. I cannot, I find, walk into it. I have never met that before in a child. Tell me, please, who taught you? My father, not Mr. Potter." Number, the hat considered. "Well," said the hat, "you are tidy inside. You are very tidy. Parts of you would do extremely well in Ravenclaw. There is an empty chair at the Ravenclaw table, and I am inclined to put you in it, and watch." "I was hoping," said Harry, "for somewhere I could watch." The hat laughed a small, dry, inward laugh, a true Ravenclaw thing to say. "But Mr. Potter, the hunger, the other thing in you, that is not Ravenclaw, that belongs elsewhere. I leave it to you," said Harry. Said the hat. "You would do well anywhere. That is a difficulty for a hat. You would, in fact, dismantle any of the 4 if you had a mind to. Let us be careful. Gryffindor will want you for the heroism later, and I do not think you are going to play it. Hufflepuff would work you too hard in the wrong direction. Ravenclaw would bore you with kindness. Slytherin, yes. Slytherin would be a home for you," the hat said, unexpectedly softly. "They will make, I think, a fascinating family. They need you, I think, more than the others. They will not all be pleased to have you. Some will be afraid. You will handle them. Is this acceptable?" "Yes." "Then, Slytherin." The last word was shouted as the hat shouted it into the hall. The hall was silent. It was silent for perhaps 3 seconds. It was a silence Harry did not recall having heard again in the next 7 years. A full and attentive silence, in which every face at every table had turned, and every adult at the staff table had turned, and even the ghosts had stopped talking. Then at the Slytherin table, a single boy clapped experimentally. A girl beside him joined. The table as a whole took courage and applauded, not in rapture but in a careful, almost formal way, as one might applaud an unexpected guest at a wedding. The rest of the hall, scattered, joined in. Harry rose. He handed the hat back to McGonagall with a small thank you. He walked down between the tables to the green and silver banner. He did not look at the red and gold table, where he could feel, without looking, that Hermione and Ron and Neville were watching him go. He would go to them later at breakfast. He had not meant to choose Slytherin against them, but he was not going to refuse what the hat had offered. He found a seat at Slytherin between a thin, watchful boy he recognized from the train, Blaise Zabini, a name he had filed, and a girl with pale hair and a carved, sober face, Daphne Greengrass. Across the table, Draco Malfoy stared at him as if he had performed a conjuring trick Draco himself had been rehearsing for a week. "Welcome," said Blaise Zabini, in a voice that was not warm but was polite. "You are not what I expected. I shall endeavor to be no worse," said Harry, "and if I can manage it, a little better." At the staff table, far away, a very tall old man with a silver beard and half-moon spectacles set down a fork he had been about to raise and leaned back in his chair and did not eat again for the length of the sorting. The Slytherin common room that night was a low-ceilinged chamber of stone and green glass with a long view. When one went to the window of the bottom of the lake, a great squid drifted past the window twice during the prefect's welcome speech. Harry had a cot in a small dormitory with 4 other first-year boys. Blaise, Draco, to whom he nodded politely, and from whom he received, after a beat, a nod back, a slightly frightened boy named Theodore Knott, and Gregory Goyle. He unpacked only what he needed. He did not unpack the bog oak folding knife. That stayed in the small lined compartment at the bottom of his trunk, with the drawer key, with the envelope of baby hair, with the photograph of a red-haired woman and a dark-haired man laughing in somebody's garden. He slept well. In the morning, at breakfast, he did what he had decided on the train he would do. He walked the length of the great hall and, with McGonagall's unreadable eye on him, sat down on the Gryffindor bench opposite Hermione and Ron and Neville. He said, "Good morning." He said, "I hope you won't mind me coming over for breakfast sometimes. I don't intend to surrender my common room, but I have no intention of surrendering my friends either. If I'm not welcome, tell me and I shan't do it again." There was a short silence. Then Hermione, with her hands in her lap, said very carefully, "We had a conversation about this, actually. Oh, Neville said you would come over at breakfast. Ron said you wouldn't. I said I didn't know, but I hoped you would. You're welcome, Harry." Ron, after a small war on his own face, won a small war on his own face. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, come over." Harry ate his breakfast. A second year at the Slytherin table glared at the back of his head until he ignored it long enough that it gave up. It did not come up again. Within a week, his habit of breakfasting with Gryffindors, of lunching with Slytherins, and of dining with whomever he pleased had acquired, in the school's gossip, the status of a weather phenomenon to which one adjusted. Snape's class was on Friday morning at 9. The dungeons were cold. Harry was in his robe and in a wool scarf he had brought from Italy, and was warm enough. Beside him, Hermione, who had fought her way, with the determination of a person taking a hill in Flanders, into permission to take potions with the Slytherins on certain days, was warm enough through the force of her own resolve. Professor Snape came in like a man coming in with a grievance that had been kept on ice for 30 years. He did not glance at Harry. Then, when all the rest of the class had been brought to attention by the opening speech, a speech, Harry noted, with a few very fine sentences in it, he did, "Mr. Potter, our new celebrity." The word was said with such particular care that Harry almost complimented him on it. Instead, he rose slightly in his seat, as one would for any master addressing one by name. "Sir, tell me, Mr. Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? A draught of the living dead, sir. A sleeping potion of such potency that the consumer appears to have died. It is in the reading." Snape's eye sharpened. "Where, Potter, would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "In the stomach of a goat, sir." "If I could not find a goat in the cabinet of a competent poisoner." Hermione's head moved fractionally, as if she were trying to see Harry's face in profile without giving herself away. Snape's thin mouth tightened. "What," he said, "is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "There is none, sir. Both are common names for Aconitum napellus. The third name is aconite. The whole plant is lethal. The root is most lethal." Snape did not speak for a moment. His face, which Harry had heard many things about from Ron on the train, did a thing that Harry suspected it had not done often in its owner's life. It relaxed by a precise, controlled fraction. "Take 5 points for Slytherin," he said, "for being prepared. Do not," he added, "develop the habit of enjoying it." "No, sir." He turned back to the blackboard and the class, as if released, exhaled. Hermione at Harry's elbow hissed, "How?" and Harry quietly said, "I asked my father to send me the texts. I read them over the summer." It was not the whole truth. Hannibal had chosen the texts. Hannibal had annotated them in a spidery hand. Hannibal had tested him on the annotations. The asphodel and wormhood question had been in one of those annotations, marked with a small marginal drawing of a bell. Harry had known when the question came out of Snape's mouth that Snape had taken him for a boy who would not have known the bell. He did not correct anyone's idea of him where he did not have to. It was a rule of his. He did not correct Snape's. That afternoon he was summoned by a polite note delivered on an owl during lunch to the headmaster's office. "Sherbet lemon," said the gargoyle to his polite knock. The gargoyle did not stir. "Ah," said Harry to himself mildly. A password. He tried lemon sherbet, nothing. Sugar quill, nothing. Licorice wand, nothing. Cockroach cluster, nothing. Pear drop. The gargoyle slid neatly aside. The staircase turned. The door at the top opened on a round study of considerable clutter, in which a very tall man stood at a perch tending to a very old phoenix, which regarded Harry with courteous red eyes. "Mr. Potter," said Albus Dumbledore, "come in, have a seat. I thought you might like to talk. Thank you, headmaster. A lemon drop, no, thank you. A chocolate, no, thank you, sir. Tea, that I should like, sir." Dumbledore poured. He sat. He smiled the smile of a man whose face had been smiling for 70 years and had got extremely good at it. Harry in his chair kept his hands loose on his knees and his feet flat on the floor and his breath in his belly, the way Hannibal had taught him to sit when one did not know what one was in the room for. "You are a young man of surprises, Mr. Potter." "I did not intend to surprise, headmaster." "No," said Dumbledore thoughtfully. "No, I do not think you did. That may be what most surprises me. Tell me if you would, and forgive the impertinence who brought you up." "Dr. Lecter, sir, for the last 3.5 years. And before that, your aunt." "Yes, sir, for rather less time than you may have been told." Dumbledore's eye flickered. He drank a small sip of his tea. "Dr. Lecter, Mr. Potter, I find in searching our records that I know very little about him." "He would be flattered, sir. He regards the unknown as a courtesy." "Does he? He has told me so. And is he a wizard, your Dr. Lecter?" "No, sir." Harry drank his tea. Dumbledore drank his tea. A silver instrument on a side table emitted, at irregular intervals, a small puff of smoke. The phoenix shifted on his perch. "I had," Dumbledore said at last, in a voice that had deliberately lost some of the smile, "a certain idea of the kind of young man I expected to meet, Mr. Potter. The idea was perhaps too firm. Sir, among the things I had expected, Mr. Potter, was a need for guidance. I am sure I should be grateful for guidance, headmaster." Dumbledore looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Are you?" "I am grateful for all courtesies, sir. It does not follow that I shall accept all of them." For a full 3 seconds Albus Dumbledore did not speak. Harry saw for the first time an expression he had never thought to see on a man of that age and that reputation, a small, held-in fear. It was not fear of Harry, it was fear of having been for several years wrong about Harry. It was, Harry knew, the cleanest fear a schoolmaster could have. He respected it. He did not let Dumbledore see that he respected it. "Well," said Dumbledore, setting down the cup. "Well, another day then. Do come and see me, Mr. Potter, whenever you feel the urge. The door is generally open. The password changes weekly. At present, as you have worked out, it is pear drop. Thank you, headmaster." He went to the door. At the door he paused as if an afterthought. "Sir." "Yes, I understand there is a corridor on the 3rd floor that is out of bounds to those who do not wish to die a most painful death." "Yes," said Dumbledore warily. "I was going to avoid it," said Harry. "I thought I should tell you. I can imagine how much work went into deciding what to put in it. I should be sorry to spoil the effort." He closed the door behind him very gently. In the stairwell, in the wavering descent of the spiral, he permitted himself, for the first time that day, a small private smile. Then he shut the smile away in a cupboard in his palace and walked back to the Slytherin common room to write a letter. The letter, dispatched that evening by the school's owl service, reached Florence on Sunday. "Father, Professor Dumbledore is a shepherd. I have been assigned, I am told, a particular kind of lamb. He has not yet noticed that I am the wrong animal. I do not intend to enlighten him in a hurry. Professor Snape, who has, I gather, a long-standing grudge against my father, tried to trap me in class. He failed. I did not enjoy making him fail, but I did not enjoy pretending I could not answer, so there we are. He gave me 5 points for Slytherin and told me not to develop the habit of enjoying it. I shall obey. Hermione is a friend. Ron is a friend who will need time. Neville is a friend who needs nothing. Draco is predictable, which makes him tiring. There is a corridor on the 3rd floor that has been closed off with great ceremony and to which I have been cordially not invited. I told the headmaster I would not go near it. I intend to walk past it every Tuesday on my way to the library at 7:30. Your son, Harry Hannibal's reply came by owl the following Thursday. The letter in his small, precise hand read, My dear Harry, your instincts are well tuned. Read, for instance, the part of your letter about the corridor again, aloud, and listen to yourself. You have already decided it is a test. You are correct, it is a test. I encourage your Tuesday habit. Find out at leisure what is behind the door. Do not be in a hurry. A cake baked too quickly is a cake, but not a fine one. Shepherds who wish to steer the flock often bleat loudest. Let your headmaster bleat as he pleases. When you sit in his office, remain at ease. He is looking at you for signs of panic. He does not know what it means that he does not find any. Find in the coming weeks what he fears. Every shepherd fears a particular kind of wolf. It is not the wolf itself, it is the wolf's sudden competence. The headmaster, if he is anything like the men I have observed, fears a clever student who cannot be directed. Be that student. Do not, however, be the wolf he is already imagining. Be the one he is not. It will disarm him. A small practical matter, Professor Snape. I read the paragraph twice. I am of the opinion that Professor Snape, whatever his grudge, has in him the makings of an ally of yours should you wish to cultivate him. He is clever. He is a connoisseur of bitterness. He is, from your account, a man who recognizes competence when he sees it and is, I suspect, tired. If you offer him, quietly and over the course of the year, the uncomplicated courtesy of never once pretending to be stupid in his class, he will, I think, come round. Do not attempt to charm him. He has been charmed before by people less honest than you. Write again on Sunday. Tell me what you had for dinner. Yours, Father. Harry read the letter twice. He read it a third time. He folded it with care and placed it, with his other letters, in a thin leather envelope at the bottom of his trunk. He took out the little black notebook and wrote on the first free page, What is behind the door? Then under it, What does Dumbledore fear? Then under that, What is tired in Professor Snape? Then he closed the notebook, went out of the dormitory, down the narrow staircase, through the common room, blazed Zabini by the fire, inclined his head. Harry returned the gesture, and up the long, chilly stair to the ground floor and across the lawn to the great hall where dinner was being served. He sat that evening at the Slytherin table. He sat at the end nearest the door. Daphne Greengrass made room for him. Across from him, Theodore Nott, pale, polite, eyed him with a look Harry was beginning to recognize in the faces of the colder of his housemates. A small, considered deference, the kind that was given to a chess piece which had, unexpectedly, begun moving itself. Mr. Potter, said Theodore, Mr. Nott, my father asked me to convey his regards and to ask whether you would be attending the Slug Club. I had not heard of it. Professor Slughorn will invite you. It is a dinner society. My father says you should know in advance of the invitation that the dinners are excellent. Thank you, I shall consider it. A question, if I may. Yes, are you really? Harry looked up from his soup. Theodore Nott was 11 years old. Theodore Nott had a thin face and thin eyes and the tired mouth of a boy raised in a house that, if one passed it on the road, one would not wish to stop at. Theodore Nott had, beneath the controlled deference, an actual question in him. It was not about the scar. Am I really what, Theodore? What you seem? No, said Harry, meeting his eye quietly. No one is. Theodore nodded with something that was not yet friendship, but was the foundation for it. Thank you, Mr. Potter. Harry, said Harry, if you like, Harry. At the high table, very far away, a man in a pale turban picked up his goblet with hands that had begun to tremble and drank and set it down again. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The Mirror of Eris, the professor's turban. The smell hit Harry in the second week of the term. He had stepped into defense against the dark arts on a Monday morning, been struck at the door by the garlic that lay about the room in strings and heaps like a pantomime, and had decided, with the long, patient courtesy he reserved for classrooms, to set his satchel down at the second-row desk and remain standing. He was not the only student standing. It was a small room, and it had been overdecorated. Hermione, who had come to this class on her Slytherin-inclusive schedule, stood opposite him looking irritated. The man thinks he is frightening, she muttered. He is only cluttering. Harry did not answer. The smell had come over him at the threshold and was now, as Professor Quirrell moved about the room adjusting a hanging bulb of garlic, resolving itself in Harry's nose the way a cord resolves after its tonic. He breathed in shallowly, the way Hannibal had taught him to breathe when he wished to sort a smell. He found first the garlic. He found second a man's sweat, sour, frightened, old. He found third the faint, clean mineral tang of something very cold and dry, like limestone in a cavern that had been closed for 100 years. He found fourth, and at this point he put his hand out without fuss to steady himself against the back of a chair, the perfume of something he could not name. It was a smell his nose did not like. It was the smell of a mouth that had not eaten a proper meal in many years. It was the smell beneath of nothing at all, a hole, an absence, a shadow where a person should have been. There were two men in Professor Quirrell's robes. One of them was Quirrell and was ill and afraid. The other was not Quirrell and was not ill and was not afraid and had been in the room first. "And Mr. P. Potter," said Quirrell at the front of the room, stammering out a smile. "And Miss G. Granger, I trust you have brought your P. primary text." "Yes, Professor." Harry sat. He wrote in his schoolbook under the heading that day, "Two Men." He did nothing else with the observation for the moment except keep it. He kept it in a lockbox in the smallest room of his palace and did not open the box. Hannibal had taught him that a fact in a box was a weapon. A fact in the open was only a gossip. He preferred weapons. That Friday, in flourish and blots by owl order, he received a parcel containing, wrapped in paper, a book on the founder magics of the British Isles, a book on defense against ritual possession, and tucked in the end of the parcel, a small note in Hannibal's hand that said only, "I thought of you." Harry did not ask how Hannibal had known to send them. He read them at night, by the light of a charmed lamp he had bought from a sixth year in the common room who specialized in illicit light sources. He finished the book on possession in a week. He finished the book on founder magics in 2. He did not tell Hermione what he was reading. He did tell her that he was worried about Quirrell. Hermione, who liked a good fact better than she liked most people, had responded by making a quiet list of Quirrell's oddities in a small green notebook, which she kept inside her bigger blue notebook. By Halloween they had 17 entries. Halloween, the feast began at 6. Harry had eaten with the Slytherins on principle and sat at the Gryffindor end of his own table so that Hermione and Ron and Neville could wander over between courses, which they did twice. Hermione was in high spirits. She had found, that afternoon, a footnote in a book on defensive hexes that confirmed her private theory about Quirrell. Ron was eating with a kind of grim competitive focus at his own table. Neville had lost his toad again. The doors opened. Quirrell burst in. His turban was awry. His face was white. He ran up the aisle shrieking about a troll in the dungeon, faltered at the high table, fainted. A wave of noise rose in the hall and broke and began to reorganize itself into panicked small groups. The headmaster was on his feet. Prefects were issuing orders. Harry stood up without hurry and began to work. Hermione, yes, has not been in this hall for the last half hour. She is in the library or in the girls' lavatory on the second floor. She was upset at luncheon. Ron apologized to her, "Would you later, for whatever you said." Ron, who had gone red, said, "I didn't actually, yes," in the tones of a boy who had been expecting for several hours to have to say that. "Neville, take Trevor to your common room. Do not take the main staircase. Take the corridor past the tapestry of the dancing bears." "Go." "Yes, Harry, I am going to the second floor." "You are not a prefect," said Ron. "Number, I am a friend. Go with your prefect, Ron." He went. The castle at the start of a panic is a faster building than it looks. Harry took the short stair behind the statue of the one-eyed witch, which Fred and George Weasley, sitting apart at the Gryffindor table not in panic, had shown him about 2 weeks before with a wink. He came out on the third floor, took the long corridor on the side of the kitchens, and reached the second-floor girls' lavatory in 5 minutes flat. The troll was already at the door. It was, as a species of magical creature, essentially disappointing. A large, gray, clumsy mass of bad temper with a club. It smelled of wet dog and old cheese. It was not, in the ordinary sense, dangerous. It was dangerous the way a falling rock is dangerous. It was slow and heavy and in the wrong place. Hermione was in the third stall. She had seen it. She had latched the door. The troll was raising the club. "Hermione," Harry said quietly from the doorway, "do not move." The troll turned. Harry had never in his life cast a proper spell. He had done magic. He had not cast. He had sat for 2 weeks with a book on defensive hexes open on his knee, reading the older forms, which were simpler and colder and did not have any Latin in them at all. He did not reach for his wand. He had not yet, in practice, found that he needed one. The troll, at the turning of its head, had drawn in breath to bellow. Harry breathed in at the same time and out at the same time and said, at the bottom of his breath, one word in a language that was much older than Latin, and raised one hand not above the waist and pressed the air gently back. The troll's in-breath did not go in. The troll's lungs were, for the length of 5 full beats of Harry's heart, full of nothing. They did not collapse. They did not inflate. They simply stayed as they were. The troll's eyes, already small, became smaller. Its club descended weakly. Its legs folded at the knees, and it sat down on the flagstones, and at the 6th beat, it toppled sideways and did not move. Harry lifted the pressure off. The troll's chest rose slowly. It was not dead. It was asleep, in the particular manner of very large animals that have just run out of oxygen. "Hermione, it is safe. Come out." Hermione came out. Her hair was larger than it had been an hour before. Her eyes were very bright. You didn't use your wand. Number, what did you? I shall tell you later. Professors McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell arrived with a wind of footsteps in the lavatory doorway a minute later. Quirrell hung back. Snape limped slightly, which Harry noted without comment. McGonagall assessed, issued the requisite number of points and reprimands, and when Hermione, God bless her, Harry thought, took the blame with the unshakable composure of someone who had rehearsed for 40 seconds and believed herself utterly, sent them all to their common rooms. Snape's eye at the door held Harry's for a fraction longer than was necessary. It was not a friendly look, it was an interested one. Mr. Potter, sir. Do you frequently render trolls unconscious without a wand? No, sir. Had you planned to? I had planned, sir, not to be in a position that required it. The plan failed. Snape's mouth did the minute relaxation Harry had learned over the past 2 months to recognize as the second closest thing to approval Snape's face produced. 20 points, Mr. Potter, for an improvisation of admirable restraint. Do not let the habit grow. He swept away, his robes trailing like an opinion. In the common room that evening, Hermione, seated by the Gryffindor fire at Harry's invitation, he had brought her through on a pass he had not strictly been entitled to bring her on. Nobody had stopped them, said, Harry, tell me. Harry told her. He did not tell her everything. He did not yet tell her, for instance, about the second man behind Quirrell's eyes. He told her about Hannibal. He told her about the palazzo and the lessons and the pitcher. He told her in a very precise paragraph what Hannibal did to rude people. Hermione sat with her teacup cooling and her face doing a thing faces do when they are processing information that requires actually an entirely new shelf to be installed in one's head. She did not flinch. She did not recoil. She said, You are not going to hurt me. No, said Harry, of course not. Promise. I promise, and Neville and Ron and my parents. No, Hermione, they are my friends. Your parents I have not met, but they made you, and therefore they have already done something I should be grateful to them for. And the boy in Baltimore. He had it coming. I did not kill him. I did not intend to kill him. She drank her tea. She said, All right, Harry, that is all you want to say. For now, I'll have more questions later. I am, she said with the steady, practical courage he had always liked in her, bad at questions when I don't have enough facts. I'll go read. He kissed her very lightly on the top of her hair. She was the first person in the thousand transactions of his short life on whom he had ever performed that particular small formal kindness. It was not a romantic gesture. He did not have, at 11, any taste for those yet. It was the gesture of a schoolmaster for a favorite pupil who had taken very well on a first pass to a very difficult lesson. Thank you, Hermione. Don't get used to it, she said, pleased. The mirror of Arist he met in the last week of November, by what he at first took to be accident. He had been in the library past curfew on a Thursday, in pursuit of a reference in the book on possession he had failed to track down the first time, and had returned to the Slytherin common room by a route that was slightly longer than the route he had meant to take, because on a hunch he had gone 2 corridors north. In a room at the end of a disused corridor, a tall mirror had been standing against the wall. He had walked past it once. He had stopped. He had walked back. His parents were in the mirror. He had known them at once. He had in his trunk the photograph of a red-haired woman and a dark-haired man laughing in somebody's garden, and they were in the mirror a little older and a little more themselves. They smiled at him. They did not move toward him. They stood, each with a hand on one of his shoulders, as his parents might have stood had he known them. Behind them, with one hand laid lightly, at the angle Harry knew precisely, on the nape of his neck, stood Hannibal Lecter. Harry understood the mirror in about 20 seconds. There was a small inscription around the top. He read it backwards, he read it forward. He said to himself, oh, in a small polite tone, as at a clever trick in a drawing room. Then he stood at a small distance and looked at what it showed him. He did not weep. He had learned not to weep in rooms where he had not been invited to weep. He looked at his mother and she looked at him. He looked at his father and his father inclined his head. He looked at Hannibal and Hannibal's eyes in the mirror did not say anything at all, which was a thing Hannibal's eyes did in life too. He stayed for about 10 minutes, then he stepped back. He turned the mirror very carefully, a quarter turn away from the room, so that it faced the corner and no one coming in casually would see the glass. He left the room. He came back twice over the next 3 weeks, each time for a longer and quieter visit. He did not come back more than twice. On the second visit, Dumbledore was sitting in a chair beside the mirror, which had been turned back to face the room. Good evening, Mr. Potter. Good evening, Headmaster. You are not alone in coming here. It is a notorious mirror. Many students have found it. Many students have stopped at it. The tragedy is usually that they do not stop in time. Yes, sir. I shall not come back after tonight. Dumbledore's eyes watched him over the spectacles. Is there anything in the mirror that you would like to tell me, Mr. Potter? No, sir. Is there anything in the mirror that is new to you? No, sir. Then what keeps you looking? Harry considered. I am studying, he said, how not to be deceived by what pleases me. Dumbledore's mouth did a complicated thing under the beard. The phoenix eye softened in the candlelight. Mr. Potter, were you raised in any sense by anyone as a Stoic? No, sir, said Harry honestly. I was raised by a Lithuanian. Dr. Lecter again. Yes, sir. I should very much like to meet him. Be honored, sir. He speaks of you with respect. Does he? He spoke of you once as a man who had been placed in an unenviable position by the deaths of others and who had made the most of it and who would in all likelihood in the end find himself alone with his choices. He said, sir, it is a condition he understood. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. Yes, he said. Yes, Harry, I expect it is. Do not come back to this mirror. It is not useful to you. No, sir. I shall not. He did not. Christmas came early to Hogwarts, as it always did. Harry packed. He had a trunk and a satchel and a very small, neat bag of dirty laundry which he had folded as if folding mattered even in dirt. He said farewell to Hermione in the entrance hall. She was going home to her parents for the holidays. Florence, she said. Yes, send me a postcard. Yes, of which view? The one from your window, please. He sent her one. He took a separate carriage to a siding outside Hogsmeade where a long black car had been instructed to wait, and was driven by a silent man with a very good coat, across the Scottish countryside and onto the sleeper, and thence to London, and thence to Heathrow, and thence in the evening home. Hannibal met him at Peretola. He was wearing a blue scarf Harry had not seen before. He set the scarf as he drove them toward the city about Harry's shoulders. You have grown, he said, a little, a lot. Christmas at the Palazzo Capponi was a week of quiet days with the shutters half closed against the winter and the fire in the salon lit at 3 o'clock. Hannibal did not receive guests. Hannibal cooked. They ate, on the first night, a broth of chestnut and hare. They ate on the second a fish from a particular market at Mercato Sant'Ambrogio, grilled over charcoal. They read by firelight. Hannibal played the harpsichord for half an hour after dinner each night. Harry listened. On the evening of the 6th day, Hannibal took from a drawer in the study a long, thin parcel wrapped in tissue and laid it in Harry's lap. I have a present for you, Harry, not for Christmas. Consider it provisions. Harry unwrapped it. It was a fountain pen. It was slender and of silver, with a nib of gold and an inlay of black enamel. It had, where one expected a clip, no clip. The cap sat straight. On the barrel, where one expected no ornament, was a single thin line of engraving in an old Italian hand. UTCULTLLUS, as a small knife. Take off the cap, please, said Hannibal. Harry took off the cap. The nib was a nib. It wrote, as Harry discovered by drawing a line on the pad in his lap, in blue-black ink. Now turn the cap, said Hannibal, in the other direction, the one that does not seem right. Harry turned the cap in the direction that did not seem right. There was from somewhere in the barrel a small smooth click. The barrel of the pen extended itself on a concealed internal thread by 3/4 of an inch. From the top end of the pen, where the clip would have been, a small, extremely thin, extremely sharp blade of bright steel slid out on a pinion, locked into place and held still. Harry did not jump. He looked at it with interest. Then with equal interest he twisted the cap in the opposite direction, and the blade retracted, and the pen was a pen again. Very elegant, he said. I had it made, said Hannibal, by a man in Brescia who does not make these often, and with whom I have, over the years, done a particular kind of business. The blade is short because a short blade is enough. It is angled so that it cannot be drawn except by a deliberate turn. Do not carry it with ink in the barrel. Do not please show it to me next Christmas with blood on it, Harry. Show it clean. Yes, father, if it has blood on it I shall look at it and consider, but I prefer clean. Yes, father. Hannibal did not explain further. He did not need to. He laid the pen back in the tissue, wrapped it, and handed it over again with the small ceremony of a quartermaster handing an enlisted man a serviceable rifle. Harry put it in the inside pocket of his coat. He did not, for the rest of the holiday, take it out. He felt its weight, with the satisfaction of weight that has been made for a hand. On the last night in Florence, Harry told his father, over a glass of water beside the fire, about Quirrell. He told him about the 2 smells. He told him about the troll. He told him about the sweat under the garlic. He told him in short sentences, with the same careful precision he brought to any subject he had decided to think about in earnest, what he had gathered about the philosopher's stone, an object he had learned in a passing paragraph, reputed to confer immortality, and also by implication reputed to be in the school. Hannibal listened without moving. When Harry finished, Hannibal sat for a full minute with his hands folded and said, "There are 2 courses, Harry. 1. You tell the headmaster and leave it to him, and he manages the matter with whatever competence he has. 2. You manage it yourself. I shall not choose for you. I do not think, Father, that the headmaster wishes to manage it. Number, I do not think so either. I think he wishes you to manage it without having told you so. Why? Because there is something in you, Harry, that is connected to the second man and Professor Quirrell. The headmaster does not yet understand it, but he has felt it, and he would like to learn what happens when you and the second man are in the same room. He is not a cruel man. He is a curious one, and his curiosity has, over time, acquired a kind of ruthlessness. You will be all right in his hands. You will do better, however, if you are in your own. Yes, Father, do it at your own time, Harry. Do not let yourself be summoned. Do not walk into a trap. Lay one, and please, when you are done, do not stay behind to look. No, Father. They sat a little longer. Then Hannibal said idly, return with an anecdote worth telling me. I shall make us a dinner. We shall discuss it over something worth discussing it over. Yes, Father. He went back to Hogwarts with the pen in the inside pocket of his coat. In the second week of the spring term, he began, with calm intent, to probe Quirrell. He went to his office under the pretext of asking a question about a footnote in their textbook. He went a week later under the pretext of asking Quirrell's advice on a project he had entirely invented. He went a third time after flying practice, ostensibly out of breath, and sat in the chair by Quirrell's fire and panted a little, and mentioned, on the way out, a rumor he had heard in the common room that there was something in the castle that people might die to possess. Quirrell at that moved very slightly in his chair. Harry left. Every visit he learned two things. The smell resolved further. The second man, the thin, cold mineral presence behind Quirrell's eyes, became more distinct. By late February, Harry could hear him move under Quirrell's skin in the way. On a calm night in a port, one can hear a second ship at anchor, tapping gently against the first. He did not attempt to engage that second man directly. Not yet. He was laying a trap. A trap is not laid by rattling the steel under one's coat. A trap is laid by digging by night with hands. He told Hermione in the middle of March what he meant to do. I think Quirrell is Voldemort's instrument. He is possessed, he is being warned, there is a fragment of a man inside him. I know the word for it, I read the book you had. Good, what do you need from me? He told her. He needed her to be elsewhere and to be observing elsewhere. He needed her specifically on a particular evening to sit outside the classroom he had selected, with a watch in her hand and a look on her face of doing her homework, and to note if she noted anything at all the time. He needed her not to follow him in. He needed her not to fetch help unless 15 minutes passed. She did not like the plan. She did not dislike it either. She liked the thinking behind it, which was a thing Hermione Granger could not help but respect. When, she said, not tonight, when Harry, when he asks to see me alone. That invitation came on a folded note slipped into Harry's Transfiguration book on a Wednesday at the beginning of April. Mr. Potter, I should be obliged if you would meet me in classroom 3C this evening at 8 for a private conversation regarding your progress in defense. P. Quirrell. Harry read the note at the Slytherin table. He put it into his pocket. He looked up. He caught Hermione's eye across the hall. She was eating an apple. She nodded once almost imperceptibly. She had in her hand, without making a show of it, her watch, in her other hand the apple. At 7:45, Harry went up to the dormitory. He put on the inside pocket of his coat the silver pen. In the inside pocket of his other coat he put the bog oak knife. He put his wand where any boy of his age would put it, up his sleeve. He washed his face. He combed his hair. He took a glass of water. He left the common room by the front archway and walked up the stairs toward the third floor in the manner of someone going to discuss coursework. At the door of classroom 3C he paused. He breathed twice in the way Hannibal had taught him to breathe. He opened the door of the smallest room of his palace, the room where he kept the lockbox, and took the lockbox out. He set it in the center of the room. He laid a hand on it. He opened the door of the classroom. Chapter 5 end. Chapter 6, a small private dinner 3 evenings before in the headmaster's study. Harry had said, Headmaster, I believe Professor Quirrell is being warned by someone. I believe the someone is the man Professor Quirrell and the rest of you do not like to name. I believe the stone is in the castle and is bait. I believe I was the bait before the stone was. I believe you have been waiting for something to happen, and your waiting has been a patient form of asking me to let it happen to me. I should rather not let it happen to me on your terms. I intend to arrange an evening of my own, on my own terms, at a time and place of my own choosing. I am telling you because if I do not tell you, you will intervene, and your intervening will be louder than I require. I am not asking your permission, I am asking your restraint. He had said it as he might have said to Signora Rondolino that he thought the pears from Sunday's market had been slightly underripe. Dumbledore in his chair had not answered for a length of time Harry had estimated at about 30 breaths. Then Dumbledore had said, Mr. Potter. You are aware that as headmaster I have a certain duty of care. Yes, sir, you are asking me to defer it. Yes, sir, in exactly one room for exactly one evening. I shall tell you which room. I shall tell you which evening. I should like to ask please for the mirror. I shall tell you why. The mirror of Arist. Yes, sir. Dumbledore had looked at him for a long moment. A clock on the mantelpiece had ticked 4 times. On the 5th, Dumbledore had said, "Tell me why." Harry had told him. He had spoken for 8 minutes about the properties of the mirror, which he had by that point read about in 3 books, about the nature of possession by a soul fragment, on which he had read 4, about the specific vulnerability of Voldemort to certain forms of contempt, on which he had, in the quiet privacy of his study, been his own first author. He had explained what he thought Voldemort had intended to do with the stone. He had explained how he intended to make that not happen. He had not mentioned the pen. He had not mentioned the knife. He had mentioned the palace only by implication and had done so, he thought, delicately. When he had finished, Dumbledore had sat for another long stretch of silence. Then he had risen, gone to a cabinet, removed a small carved wooden key, and set it on the desk in front of Harry. The mirror will be in classroom 3C at 7 o'clock on the evening of your choice. The staircase will unlock for you with this key. I shall not tell Minerva. I shall not tell Severus. I shall tell Pomona and Phileas only what they need to know to keep the corridors clear. Mr. Potter. Yes, sir. If anything goes wrong, I shall intervene. I shall intervene hard. I may intervene even before I know anything has gone wrong. Yes, sir. I should prefer that you came only if I called. I shall decide by myself whether to come. Yes, sir. I understand. Mr. Potter, sir. I should like, when this is over, to have a long conversation with your guardian. Will you ask him, please, to write to me? I shall, sir. He will expect you, I think, to come to him. Then, Dumbledore had said gently, I shall come to him. Harry had taken the key. That had been the scaffolding. Tonight at 8 was the performance. He stepped into classroom 3C. The room was bare stone, with its desks pushed back against the north wall. In the center of the room stood the mirror of Arist, draped with a piece of black silk Harry had scrounged from a storage cupboard that afternoon. Behind the mirror a low stool. In front of the mirror a chair, angled slightly toward the door. On a small table by the chair a pitcher of water, a glass, and a single candle. Harry had set the scene with the exactness of a man setting a table for a small private dinner. Professor Quirrell was already in the room. He had arrived before Harry. Harry had known he would. He had allowed for it. Quirrell stood between the chair and the mirror, turban slightly bent, his eyes not quite focused. Under the turban Harry heard, not with his ears, the other breathing. Good evening, Professor. Mr. Peapotter. You may stop if you like. The stammer. The door is closed. We are alone. There is no one in the corridor whose performance requires it. There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds. Then the stammer, like a coat, fell off Quirrell. As you wish, said Quirrell in a voice that was dry and level and from which every fondness had been wrung. Sit down, Professor. I prefer to stand. Very well. Harry did not sit either. He closed the door behind him. He turned the key, which he had borrowed from Dumbledore, in the lock. He laid the key on the small table beside the candle. He did not remove his wand from his sleeve. You have been careless, said Quirrell. Have I? You have been seen in the 3rd-floor corridor. I have walked past it. I have not gone in. You have been seen at the mirror. Twice. I stopped going. It is an inferior tool. I have read the inscription. Quirrell's head tilted on his thin neck. A soft hiss, not of his making, escaped from the turban. He wishes to speak with you, Quirrell said. Then he may. I am not a shy boy. I prefer, however, to be introduced. I am, said Quirrell, Professor Quirrell. The other is Lord Voldemort. I know. I read. The introduction I was requesting was not of his title. I prefer to call people by their given names, Professor. It is a small courtesy I had from my father. A pause, longer. Then a thin, cold voice, not Quirrell's voice, came into the room. It did not come from Quirrell's mouth. It came, it seemed, from everywhere, as if the stone of the walls had been asked politely to lend it a body. It was the voice of a thing that had once been a person, and that had been so badly damaged in the intervening years that even hospitality came out of it as a kind of rasp. Turn him. Quirrell turned. He unwound as he turned the turban. He unwound it slowly, as if taking off a small hat that had become, in its wearing, distasteful. When the turban was off, the face that had been behind it, the face on the back of Quirrell's head, was visible in the light of the candle. It was not a face. It was a simulacrum of a face, gray and wet and eyeless-looking even when it had eyes. Its nostrils were 2 slits. Its mouth moved slightly on its own. Harry Potter, it said. Harry inclined his head. He did not, he noticed with interest, find himself afraid. He noted the scent first. He noted that the second man, Voldemort, smelt up close, exactly as he had smelt in the classroom, cold and mineral with the air of the closed cave, but this time thicker. the smell of an old wound that had been kept open by bad habits. He said politely, "Tom." The face reacted. It did not flinch, it did not have the muscles. But something inside it, some deep thing in the mineral cold, made a noise Harry felt more than heard, the noise of a pebble displaced in a deep pool. "How dare you?" "It is your name. I shall use it unless you ask me not to. I was told by my father to call people by the names their mothers gave them. I extend the courtesy to you. Even if you at the time found your mother's gift insufficient, I left that name behind. You did not leave it behind, you only wrote over it in a larger hand. You have been writing over it in an ever larger hand for 50 years. A name does not go away because one paints over it. The paint flakes. I see it on you. Tom Riddle. It is a good serviceable name, unremarkable, like the names of men who go on to be something." The face hissed. Quirrell, still turned, watching Harry over his own shoulder, said conversationally, "You are stalling." "Yes," said Harry, "I am." He did not explain why. He slid his hand very slowly, very naturally, into the inside pocket of his coat and closed his fingers around the pen. "The stone," said Voldemort. "Where is it?" "I have no idea. I assume it is in the castle. I assume my headmaster has it. I have not gone looking for it. I do not require it. The mirror will show you whatever it is you most wish. Tom, I have to tell you, I find this device disappointing. I looked into it last November. It offered me something I could have if I lived another 40 years and did not die an idiot. You will go to it and you will receive a small theatrical performance. If you send Quirrell to it, you will receive the performance he can give. I do not recommend the mirror. I am telling you this as an act of courtesy. I was brought up to extend courtesies even to my enemies. You, go to the mirror, Tom. I shall even be so kind as to let you go through the ceremony, see what it says, then come back and we shall have a conversation at closer range about why you are standing in a schoolroom in Scotland asking an 11-year-old to do your shopping." Quirrell's eyes glittered. There was on the face at the back of his skull a small pulse of something that in a human might have been laughter, and in that thing was not. "He is cleverer," Voldemort murmured, "than they told me he would be." "Yes," said Quirrell. "I have been telling you so." Quirrell walked to the mirror. Harry pulled the black silk off with the small courtesy of a footman removing a cover. Quirrell stood before the glass. The face of Voldemort at the back of his head turned to see it, which required Quirrell to bend slightly like a man at a tiled tub. Voldemort's face was reflected in the mirror. Around it, in the mirror only, the air thickened. The mineral smell, which had been behind Quirrell, came suddenly in a wave from the glass instead. "I see myself," Voldemort said, holding the stone. "I see myself handing it to Lord." Harry had drawn the pen. He did it without show. He did it in the small, quiet way he had been taught. He came up on Quirrell's left side in 3 steps, while Voldemort's attention was in the mirror, while Quirrell's eyes were in the mirror, while the thing at the back of Quirrell's head was in the mirror and very slightly enraged with the mirror for not showing him the particular thing he had come to see. He turned the cap of the pen backwards with the flick of his thumb. The blade slid out. He did not hesitate. He set the blade neatly, precisely, without drama, against the place at the base of the throat where a man's life, if one knew exactly where to look for it, could be found. He did not press. He said in the polite voice he had used at the Butcher S in Florence when asking for a particular cut, "Please turn around, Tom. I should prefer to speak with your face." Quirrell tried to jerk. Harry's blade found the exact surface of the skin and no more. He had been taught the difference. Quirrell turned, slowly. His back now was to the mirror. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was therefore facing the mirror again, but Quirrell's own face, the face of the man Voldemort had been wearing for a year, was looking at Harry. Quirrell's face in that light was the face of a tired man. "You had better," said Quirrell quietly, "not miss. I had rather not strike at all." Voldemort behind him spat, "Do it, you fool, kill him." The boy is holding a thin good blade to my carotid artery," said Quirrell in a voice of professorial calm. "I shall ask him his terms first. Mr. Potter, your terms. Simple ones. You will step, Professor, away from the mirror and into the chair. You will sit in the chair. You will remove your hand, which I see has been slowly traveling toward your wand, from that wand, and place both hands on the arms of the chair. You will, in so doing, surrender the wand. I shall take it. And the other, I shall speak with the other in a moment." Quirrell walked to the chair. He sat in the chair. He laid his hands, palms up, on the arms of the chair. He did it, Harry noted, with the small, cold grace of a man who had been a good professor before he had become this. Harry felt in the second between Quirrell sitting and his own reaching for Quirrell's wand, a small, clean pang of regret. He filed it. He took the wand. "Now, Tom," he said. He walked around to face Quirrell from the other side. He was now, he realized with the small pleasure of a chess player, face to face with Voldemort's simulacrum. He did not take the blade from Quirrell's throat. He held it idly there. I have been thinking about you, he said conversationally to the face. Ever since I was 8 when my father read me a history. I did not think well of you. I want to explain why. It is not that you killed my parents. Many people kill parents. It is not that you tried to kill me. I am willing to believe you had at the time what seemed to you a good reason. It is that you were rude. You went to my mother's house. She offered herself as a barrier between you and me. You crossed her. You crossed her in the most insulting terms available to a wizard. She had done you a courtesy. You had done her none. I have been raised to mind that. Raised, said the simulacrum in its thin hiss. Raised by the muggle, by Dr. Lecter, a muggle. A man, said Harry, with whom you would have lasted, I will not flatter him by saying an hour. You would have lasted less than a course. He would have looked at you across the table, Tom, and decided not to feed you. He would have declined to waste the wine. I will enter you. You are welcome to try. I have been expecting you, Tom. I have been preparing. Step out of your friend. Come to me. See what I have arranged for you. Voldemort howled and came. It was not, strictly, a thing the eye could see. It was a pressure in the room, a sucking of the air from the candle, a dimming of the light. The simulacrum on the back of Quirrell's skull loosened, like a mask from a face. A thing the shape of a very long hand came out of it. The hand reached, without touching Quirrell, across the air and took Harry by the forehead. At the point of contact, for half a second, the scar on Harry's forehead burned as it had burned on the night of his parents' death. Harry closed his eyes. He did not wince. In his mind, in the palace that Hannibal had helped him build over 3 years of lessons, he turned and walked, unhurried, down the long corridor that led from the entrance hall to the smallest room at the back. He entered the smallest room. He closed the door behind him. He lifted the lockbox that sat on the floor in the center of the smallest room. He placed the lockbox against the inside of the door. He laid his hand on the lockbox. The thing that had reached into him found now a door. The door did not open. The door was backed by the lockbox, and the lockbox contained the one thing Voldemort had never learned to carry, a lack of interest in him. The thing on the other side of the door screamed. Harry in the palace did not move his hand. In the room in Scotland, with the candle flame flickering wildly, Quirrell convulsed in the chair. The thing that had been inside him was now between him and Harry, a long, thin smear of shadow with nowhere to go. It tried to climb back into Quirrell. Quirrell's mouth opened, desperate and grateful. The shadow reached for Quirrell's face. No, said Harry from behind his closed eyes. He did not raise his voice. He raised his left hand, the one not holding the pen, and with the palm flat pushed the air in the room toward the shadow. Air is not in itself hostile to the spectral. The air was not what pushed the thing. The air was what Harry pushed through. What pushed the thing was Harry's contempt for it. He had been cultivating the contempt all winter. It was the ripest product of his year. He spent it now, generously, in one long, clean breath, as a man spends a savings account on a single hat. The shadow was thrust back from Quirrell and flung against the black silk on the floor. It tried to rise, it could not, it thinned. It became a rasp, not even a whisper. It became, in the flicker of the candle, nothing. It went at last out the window of the classroom, which Harry had left a little open on purpose for that reason. It went, Harry knew, somewhere far and thin and ineffectual. It would, he also knew, come back. That was for another year. He opened his eyes. He lowered his hand. Quirrell sat in the chair. He was still breathing, barely. His eyes were Quirrell's eyes again, and they were afraid, and they were, as the exhausted eyes of a man very long unwell sometimes are, relieved. Mr. Potter. Yes, Professor. I should like. Yes, Professor, I know. He did not make a speech. He did not take pleasure in it. He put his hand on Quirrell's shoulder, briefly, kindly, as a man puts his hand on the shoulder of a horse that has broken its leg. Then he did what had to be done. He did it with the small bog oak knife, which he had switched for the pen in the last breath, because the pen was meant for Voldemort and had done its work. He did it at the particular place at the base of the skull that makes the doing quick. He did it courteously. Quirrell in his chair went out as a candle goes out. There was no sound. There was very little blood. Harry wiped the bog oak knife on the black silk. He folded the silk around Quirrell's hands. He turned the mirror of Eris to face the wall. He placed the little carved key on the seat of the chair beside Quirrell, where Dumbledore would find it. He picked up the candle. He left the room. Hermione was in the corridor outside, sitting on a bench with a book open in her lap, not reading it. Her eyes went up to his face and found what they were looking for and came back down to the book. 9 minutes 40, she said. Thank you. Are you hurt? Number. Is he dead? Yes, all right. He walked her as far as the Gryffindor Tower. He did not go with her inside. At the portrait he said, tomorrow at breakfast, and she said, yes, and he walked down the staircase and down the next one and across the entrance hall toward the stairs that led to the dungeons. At the foot of the grand staircase, Dumbledore stood. He had not, it was clear, been in his office. He had been in the entrance hall for some time. The great hall doors were closed. The castle was very quiet. "Mr. Potter, headmaster, will you walk with me?" They walked slowly the length of the entrance hall. Dumbledore's hands were behind his back. Not ask the natural question. He did not have to, he knew from the boy's face, which was as composed as his own, what the answer was. "Tell me, headmaster," said Harry after a while, "have you ever had someone to dinner you would rather not have had?" Dumbledore walked 3 paces in silence. "Many times, my boy. I recommend the practice be limited." Dumbledore smiled very slightly behind the beard. It was the first genuine smile Harry had ever seen on him. "I shall try, Harry. I shall try. The mirror and the key are in the room, so is Professor Quirrell. He is at rest. He had at the end a certain courtesy which I should prefer not to have been the one to require of him. The other thing you will have felt it leave. It is not gone. It will be back, but not tonight. Number, I should also," said Harry, "very much like a glass of water." "Come," said Dumbledore, and turned, and they walked together up the stairs to the headmaster's office, and Dumbledore himself poured Harry a glass of water from a pewter jug, and Harry drank it sitting in the good chair, and after he had drunk it he sat for a while with his eyes closed, and Dumbledore beside him did not speak. The term ended a week later. Harry did not attend the end-of-year feast in the decorated hall. He had sent word that he was unwell. McGonagall had frowned, had seemed on the verge of investigating, and had then, without explanation, allowed it. He packed his trunk. He spent the afternoon with Hermione and Ron and Neville in a small classroom they had colonized over the spring. They ate chocolate Hermione had conjured from a hamper her mother had sent her. Ron cautiously made a joke. Harry more cautiously laughed. Neville, who by then had reached the stage of their friendship at which he did not need to speak much, sat contentedly on the floor against the wall with Trevor on his lap and occasionally nodded, and on the whole was the happiest person in the room. Hermione walked Harry to the carriage. "Right," she said, "every week. Come to London at some point. I should like to introduce you to my parents. I should like that. They will not understand you. Few people do. I would like them to try." "Then they shall try," he said. "I shall wear my best coat." She laughed. It was the laugh of a girl who had had, in the past year, a very great deal more to think about than she had been prepared for, and had, on the whole, risen to it. The Hogwarts Express climbed south. Neville, in their compartment, slept against the window. Ron, in a careful and slightly odd way, played chess with Harry for 3 hours and won twice. Hermione read a book. The Scottish fields thinned into English ones. London arrived, as it always did, in a long brown smudge that became a station. On the platform by the pillar, Hannibal stood with his hands behind his back. He was wearing a gray coat and a scarf of very dark blue. He did not wave. He did not step forward. He stood watching the train, as a farmer watches a field he has planted and has reasons of his own to think is coming on well. Harry stepped down from the train. He stepped with his trunk bumping behind him, through the ordinary traffic of end-of-year parents and end-of-year children and a few end-of-year pets. Mrs. Weasley, 20 paces off, waved at Ron and saw Harry and waved at Harry too, and Harry bowed to her with the small, precise bow he had bowed to Signora Rondolino, and Mrs. Weasley blinked and then beamed. Hermione's mother, small and anxious and clever, pressed Hermione's hand tightly and looked across at Harry with the measured look of a woman trying to decide whether to trust her daughter's new friend. Harry inclined his head to her. He would come to dinner in time. That was for later. He reached Hannibal. Hannibal looked at him. Harry looked at Hannibal. No word was spoken for perhaps 15 seconds. The look Hannibal gave him was the look Hannibal had given him the morning of his 11th birthday, on the terrace in Florence, over the candles in the cake with cardamom in it. The look of a man looking at a small, valuable thing he had been carrying safely in his pocket for some time. He saw in the look that Hannibal had read in Harry's face, without any report, everything that had happened in the classroom in Scotland. The look said, "Well done." The look also said, "We shall tonight go over it in detail." "Father, Harry." Hannibal took the trunk, Harry took the satchel. They walked together out of King's Cross to the bay on Pancras Road, where the long dark car had once more been waiting. Hannibal drove. He drove through the evening traffic as he had driven out of Privet Drive 4 years before, at an unhurried, legal, attentive speed. The city gave way to suburbs. The suburbs gave way to the beginning of motorway. Somewhere above Gerrard's Cross the sun began to slant down through a gap in the gray. "You have the pen," Hannibal said. "I have the pen. Is it clean?" "Yes, father. Show me, please." Harry took the pen from the inside pocket of his coat. He laid it carefully on the dashboard. Hannibal, with his eyes on the road, reached across with one hand and turned the cap the wrong way. The blade slid out. The blade was clean. The blade had been cleaned once, quickly, with the hem of a school cloak, and again, more carefully, in the sink of a dormitory, and a third time, with oil at leisure that morning. There was no stain on it anywhere. Hannibal held it for a long moment with his thumb across the flat of the blade, feeling for the film of blood with the particular sensitivity of his particular skin, and did not find one. He closed the blade, he set the pen back on the dashboard. Good, he said. Thank you, father. The other weapon. Also clean. I did not ask for it. I shall ask to see it tomorrow. Yes, father. They drove on. Outside, Gerard's cross the motorway opened. Hannibal moved into the second lane and set a slightly faster pace. Heathrow, he said, is in 40 minutes. I have reserved an evening flight to Pisa and a car at the other end. I telephoned this morning to Signora Rondolino. She will be at the house at 10 o'clock to welcome us. She has prepared, I am told, a cold bean soup. I did not, I confess, order a cold bean soup. I am certain we shall eat it with great pleasure. Yes, father, I should like, when we are in the air, for you to tell me about this year, from the beginning, in as much detail as you can manage. I shall listen. When you are done, I shall have a question or two. Yes, father. A long, easy silence. Then, as the English countryside slipped past the window, with its hedges and its fallen light, and its small distant lamps going on one by one in farmhouses neither of them would ever enter, Harry said, Father, yes. When does the meal truly begin? Hannibal glanced briefly across at him. His face in the dashboard light was calm. His eyes had in them a small pleasure he had not often permitted himself to show in the 3.5 years Harry had been in his care. He returned his eyes to the road. Right now, Harry, he said, we have only just been seated. They drove on. Somewhere off in the darkening countryside, in a farmhouse window they could not see and had no occasion to see, a small lamp was lit, burned for a moment, guttered, and went out. Chapter 6 End.